my wife found out how much I really earn. So she showed up with her spoiled sisters and brothers and demanded that I give them. Look, I'm not saying I had it all figured out at 38, but I was doing pretty damn well for a guy who spent his 20s convinced that networking meant having good Wi-Fi. I had finally made it to that sweet spot in life where I could walk into a Starbucks, order one of those drinks with a name longer than a pharmaceutical commercial, and not immediately check my bank account afterward to make sure I could still afford electricity. You know that feeling? That beautiful, liberating sensation of financial stability? Yeah, I was living in it, baby. Lead data consultant at a solid tech firm in Orlando, married to my college sweetheart Melissa, and finally earning the kind of money that made my father proud and my student loans slightly less depressing. Life was good. Life was quiet. Life was exactly the kind of boring that people who've been through hell appreciate, like a cold beer on a summer day. And then came the knock. Not just any knock, mind you, but one of those knocks that carries a certain energy with it. Like when the pizza delivery guy shows up, but you didn't order pizza, and suddenly you're wondering if you're being served legal papers or if someone's about to try to sell you a new religion. It was a Tuesday evening, around 7:30, and I was in that post-work zone where my brain had officially clocked out, but my body was still pretending to be productive. I had my laptop open, some spreadsheet I was pretending to care about glowing on the screen, and a documentary about penguin mating habits playing in the background, because apparently that's what passes for entertainment when you're a data consultant who stares at numbers all day. The knock came again, more insistent this time, and I figured it was probably an Amazon delivery, because let's be real, half my life arrives in cardboard boxes with that smug little arrow smile on the side. I shuffled to the door in my house slippers, the expensive ones Melissa bought me last Christmas that I pretended to love, but secretly thought made me look like a geriatric Hugh Hefner, and swung it open expecting to see some exhausted delivery driver who just wanted to get through their route and go home. Instead, I got the full family reunion experience, minus the potato salad and the awkward small talk about the weather. There stood Melissa, my wife of 6 years, dressed like she was about to walk into a reunion special for a reality show I didn't remember auditioning for. She had that smile on, the one I'd started recognizing over the past few months as her "I need something expensive" face, all teeth and calculated warmth. But she wasn't alone. Oh no, she'd brought reinforcements. Flanking her like Secret Service agents protecting the world's least important person were her 3 siblings, Troy, Becca, and Lily, the holy trinity of freeloading that I'd successfully avoided for most of our marriage. Troy was 28 and dressed like a DJ who performs at bar mitzvahs nobody wants to remember, all designer knockoffs and cologne that smelled like it came with a free trial of poor life choices. Becca was 31, wearing what I can only describe as entrepreneurial delusion chic, all athleisure wear and motivational hashtags probably floating through her head like screensavers. And Lily, the baby at 25, looked like she'd just rolled out of a coffee shop where she'd been working on her novel for the past 4 years, which we all knew was code for scrolling through Instagram and judging other people's brunch choices. "Hey, babe," Melissa chirped, leaning in to kiss my cheek with the kind of affection you show to someone whose credit card you're about to max out. "We just wanted to stop by and talk. You know, catch up. Family time." She said family time the way a used car salesman says fully loaded, and my internal alarm system immediately started blaring like a tornado siren in Kansas. I stepped back, letting them file into my apartment like auditors preparing to investigate my entire existence. Troy immediately beelined for my sound system, because of course he did, while Becca and Lily made themselves comfortable on my couch like they'd paid rent. Melissa squeezed my hand, and I could feel the tension radiating off her like heat from asphalt in July. "So," Becca said, not even 30 seconds into this ambush masquerading as a social call, "Melissa mentioned you got another promotion." She said it casually, like she was commenting on the weather, but her eyes had that gleam, that predatory shine that sharks get when they smell blood in the water. "That's amazing." She said, "You're making, what, 6 figures now?" And there it was, the real reason for this little gathering. Not because they missed me, not because they wanted to celebrate my success, but because someone had let it slip that I'd finally crawled out of the financial hole that is your 20s and early 30s and emerged on the other side with actual, real, spendable income. The kind of money that changes your life from "can I afford guacamole" to "I'll take the guacamole" and throw in some of that overpriced queso while you're at it. I looked at Melissa, really looked at her, and saw something I'd been trying to ignore for months. This wasn't my wife standing in front of me anymore. This was a woman who'd done the math, run the numbers, and decided that my bank account was more interesting than my personality. Her siblings weren't here by accident. This was coordinated. This was planned. This was a robbery with hugs and fake smiles, and I was the bank. We just thought. Troy chimed in, fiddling with one of my vinyl records like he had any appreciation for music that didn't include auto-tune and bass drops. That since you're doing so well, maybe you could help out the family a bit. You know, spread the wealth. He said it with this casual entitlement, like my success was somehow a community resource that everyone deserved access to, like I was a public park or a library book. Lily nodded enthusiastically, her carefully curated messy bun bouncing with what I can only assume she thought was endearing energy. Yeah, we're all struggling right now, and you've got it made. It's only fair, right? Family helps family. I stood there, looking at these 4 people in my living room. These people who barely acknowledged my existence when I was grinding through 60-hour work weeks and eating ramen like it was a food group. These people who suddenly discovered I was related to them the exact moment my salary broke into comfortable territory, and I felt something shift inside me. It was like watching a magic trick in reverse, where the illusion falls apart and you see all the mirrors and wires and realize you've been played from the start. Melissa squeezed my hand again, harder this time, her smile never wavering. We just want to talk about some opportunities, she said softly, using that voice she usually reserved for when she wanted something expensive and was trying to make it sound reasonable. You know, investments. Family investments. I looked at her perfectly applied makeup, her designer outfit that I definitely paid for, her siblings scattered around my apartment like they owned the place, and I finally understood what was happening. This wasn't a visit. This wasn't a conversation. This was a negotiation, and I hadn't agreed to come to the table. They'd calculated my worth down to the dollar and decided it was time to cash in. Love had nothing to do with it anymore. This was business, cold and transactional, wrapped in the pretty packaging of family obligation. And standing there, with my wife's hand in mine and her siblings' eyes boring into me like I was a winning lottery ticket, I made a decision. Not right then, not out loud, but somewhere deep in my gut where the truth lives before your brain has time to sugarcoat it. I decided that I was done being the ATM with feelings. Done being the walking bank account that occasionally got invited to family functions. Done pretending that this was normal, that this was love, that this was anything other than exactly what it looked like. But I smiled, because I was raised to be polite even when people are trying to rob you blind, and said, yeah, let's talk about it. Because sometimes, before you can walk away, you need to see just how deep the con really goes. Here's the thing about hindsight that nobody tells you until you're drowning in it. It's got 20/20 vision and a really cruel sense of humor. Sitting there in my living room, watching Melissa and her siblings circle me like vultures who'd just spotted roadkill, my brain decided to take a little trip down memory lane. And let me tell you, that lane was paved with red flags I'd apparently mistaken for welcome mats. Because back when I was broke, back when my bank account had more zeros before the decimal point than after it, Melissa loved to tell anyone who'd listened that she was a budget wife. She'd say it with this proud little smile, like she deserved a medal for loving someone whose idea of a fancy dinner was upgrading from store-brand mac and cheese to the name-brand stuff. I don't need fancy things, she'd announce to her friends, usually while browsing online boutiques and adding things to carts she had no intention of paying for herself. I'm not like those other girls who need designer bags and expensive jewelry. I'm simple. I'm real. And then she'd turn around and order $75 worth of artisanal candles from some website that promised they were hand-poured by monks in the mountains of Vermont or some equally ridiculous origin story. And when I'd look at the credit card statement with my eye twitching, she'd wave it off like it was nothing. It's aromatherapy, babe. For the soul. You can't put a price on spiritual wellness. Apparently, you could, though, and it was exactly $75 plus shipping and handling. We met back when I was 25 and stupid, which is redundant because everyone's stupid at 25, they just don't know it yet. I was a data intern at a company that paid me in experience and the occasional pizza party, living in an apartment that was generous enough to call itself a studio when it was really just a closet with delusions of grandeur. My furniture consisted of a mattress on the floor, a folding table I'd stolen from my college dorm, and a TV I'd found on Craigslist from a guy who claimed it only had a small crack, which turned out to be half the screen. I was eating microwave noodles for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, rotating between the different flavors like I was some kind of ramen sommelier, and genuinely believing that this was just a temporary stop on my way to greatness. Melissa was working as a receptionist at a dental office, and we met at some mutual friends' barbecue where the beer was cheap and the conversation was cheaper. She was pretty in that girl next door way that makes you think you've got a shot, all bright smiles and easy laughter. And when she talked to me, she actually seemed interested in what I had to say. Not about what I currently was, mind you, but about what I was going to be. That should have been my first clue, but like I said, 25 and stupid. You're going to be really successful someday, she told me on our third date, sitting across from me at a diner where the coffee tasted like regret and the pancakes had the texture of industrial sponge. I can tell. You've got that drive, that ambition. You're going somewhere. She said it like she was reading my fortune, like she could see into the future and had already decided it was worth investing in. I thought it was sweet. I thought she believed in me. Looking back, I realized she was doing market research. For the first few years, things were actually okay. We were broke together, which somehow made it romantic instead of depressing. We'd split dollar menu items and call it a date. We'd watch Netflix on my laptop because cable was a luxury for people who had their lives together. We'd talk about the future like it was this guaranteed thing, this destination we were definitely going to reach if we just kept grinding. She'd kiss me and tell me she didn't care about money, that she loved me for me. And I believed her because I wanted to believe her, because the alternative was admitting that I was dating someone who saw me as a fixer-upper. But here's the funny thing about being broke. It's a really effective filter for finding out who actually gives a damn about you. Melissa's siblings? They didn't acknowledge my existence. I'm not exaggerating. Troy walked past me at family gatherings like I was furniture. Becca literally forgot my name for the first 2 years I was dating Melissa, calling me the data guy, like I was some minor character in a show she wasn't really watching. Lily asked me once what I did for a living, and when I explained data analysis, she said, "Oh, so like Excel?" with this dismissive tone that made it clear she thought I was basically a human calculator with no personality. Melissa's parents weren't much better. Her dad would shake my hand with this limp grip that said, "I'm tolerating you because my daughter is," and her mom would smile at me the way you smile at a stray dog that followed your kid home, polite but hopeful that it would leave soon. Family dinners were exercises in feeling invisible, sitting at the table while everyone talked around me, through me, occasionally at me if they needed something passed, and couldn't be bothered to reach for it themselves. And Melissa? She never defended me, never said, "Hey, maybe treat my boyfriend like he's actually here." She'd just laugh along with their jokes, squeeze my hand under the table like that made up for it, and later tell me, "They're just joking around. Don't be so sensitive," which is code for, "I'm not going to stand up for you because it's easier to let them disrespect you than to rock the boat." The years crawled by like that. Me grinding through entry-level positions, working my way up from intern to junior analyst to actual analyst, pulling 60-hour weeks and teaching myself coding languages on YouTube at 2 in the morning because I was convinced that if I just worked hard enough, if I just proved myself enough, everything would fall into place. Melissa kept working at the dental office, coming home with stories about difficult patients and drama with the hygienists, spending her paychecks on things we didn't need and couldn't afford while I covered rent and utilities and groceries. "You make more than me," she'd say whenever I questioned a purchase, which was technically true but also completely missed the point. "It makes sense that you pay for more stuff. That's just math." It wasn't math. It was convenience. It was her getting comfortable with the idea that my money was our money, but her money was her money, a financial philosophy that would have made a divorce lawyer salivate. Then came the promotion, the big one. The one I'd been working toward for 7 years, sacrificing weekends and sleep and any semblance of a social life that didn't involve spreadsheets. Lead data consultant at Neurologic Systems, with a salary that finally had commas in it and benefits that didn't make me want to cry. I called Melissa from the office, practically vibrating with excitement, and she screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "We made it," she shouted, and I remember thinking it was weird that she said, "we," when she'd spent the last 7 years telling me I was obsessed with work and needed to relax more. But I was too happy to care, too relieved that the grinding was finally paying off, that I could stop eating like a college student and start living like an actual adult. That night, we celebrated at a restaurant that didn't have plastic menus, and Melissa ordered champagne like we were in a movie. She held my hand across the table, her eyes shining with something I mistook for pride, but was probably closer to calculation, and told me how proud she was of me. "You did it, babe. You really did it. I always knew you would." Within a week, her siblings had my phone number. Within 2 weeks, they'd started a group chat called Family Opportunities, which I wasn't added to, but Melissa accidentally showed me when she left her phone unlocked on the counter. The messages were a greatest hits compilation of entitlement. Troy asking if I could invest in his DJ equipment, Becca wondering if I'd be interested in partnering on her fashion line, Lily casually mentioning she needed help with student loans from a degree she never finished, and Melissa, my supposedly simple, budget-conscious wife who didn't need fancy things. She started shopping like she'd won the lottery. Designer purses appeared in our closet. Our bathroom filled up with skincare products that cost more than my first car. She'd come home with bags from stores I didn't even know existed, and when I asked about it, she'd smile and say, "We can afford it now. Why shouldn't I enjoy it? I should have seen it coming." The universe gave me red flags in bulk, hung them from every conversation and every interaction like Christmas lights, and I just walked past them thinking they were decorations. I thought they were just being friendly, finally accepting me now that I'd made it. I thought Melissa was just enjoying the fruits of our labor, finally able to relax after years of struggling. I didn't realize I wasn't a husband anymore. I was a promotion. I was an upgrade. I was the answer to a question her family had been asking for years. How do we get ours? And the answer, apparently, was me. Let me tell you something about becoming successful that nobody mentions in those motivational Instagram posts with the sunset backgrounds and the cursive fonts. The higher you climb, the more people suddenly remember they know you. It's like some kind of financial sonar that goes off in people's brains the moment your direct deposit hits a certain number, and suddenly you're everyone's favorite person, best friend, and personal ATM all rolled into one convenient package. After 7 years of eating anxiety for breakfast and imposter syndrome for dinner, I finally made it to the top of the food chain at Neurologic Systems. Lead analyst. Corner office. The kind of business cards that actually impressed people at networking events instead of ending up as impromptu coasters. I built predictive algorithms that could forecast market trends with scary accuracy, automated processes that saved the company millions, and somehow managed to automate my own sleep schedule down to 4 hours a night, because apparently success requires you to sacrifice basic human needs like rest and sanity. My brain ran on coffee, ambition, and the kind of spite that comes from everyone telling you that you'd never make it. I became the guy other companies tried to poach, the one who got LinkedIn messages from recruiters promising the moon and equity packages that sounded too good to be true and usually were. But here's the kicker. Melissa never once asked me how work was going. Not in any meaningful way, at least. She didn't ask about the projects I was managing, the teams I was leading, or the problems I was solving that kept me up at night staring at the ceiling like it held the answers to recursive algorithms. No, her version of checking in on my career went something like this. So, when's the next raise? Or did they mention anything about bonuses? Or my personal favorite, your boss seems to really like you. Think you could ask for more? She talked about my job the way day traders talk about stocks, all transactional interest and zero emotional investment. Meanwhile, I was trying to be the good son, the responsible adult my father Franklin Miles raised me to be. Dad ran a family diner back in Jacksonville, the kind of place where the coffee's always hot, the pancakes are always fluffy, and the profit margins are always razor thin. He'd been talking about updating the equipment for years, but between keeping the lights on and paying his small staff fair wages, there was never anything left over for upgrades. So when I started making real money, the kind that didn't disappear the moment it hit my account, I started sending him checks. Not huge amounts, nothing that would bankrupt me, but enough to help him finally fix that industrial oven that had been held together with duct tape and prayers since the Clinton administration. Every month, I'd wire him money, and every month he'd call me with this crack in his voice like he was trying not to cry, telling me I didn't have to do this, that he was proud of me regardless. All that dad stuff that makes you feel like maybe you're doing something right in this world. It felt good. It felt purposeful. It felt like my success actually meant something beyond just accumulating zeros in a bank account. But Melissa? Oh, Melissa had different ideas about what constituted helping family. To her, family meant her siblings, those three walking financial emergencies who treated responsibility like it was a communicable disease they were actively avoiding. She thought helping family meant funding Troy's latest business venture, which this month happened to be his DJ career, even though his entire music library was downloaded from YouTube and his mixing skills peaked at hitting the play button. She thought it meant bankrolling Becca's Boutique, a failed fashion line that sold exactly 3 items in 6 months, all to Becca herself, which doesn't count as sales. That's just moving inventory from one pocket to another. And then there was Lily's crypto obsession, because of course there was. Every family has that one person who discovers cryptocurrency and immediately becomes insufferable about it, talking about blockchain and decentralization like they're spreading the gospel, trying to convince you that traditional currency is for suckers while they're still living in their mom's basement eating cereal for dinner. Lily wanted me to invest in her crypto portfolio, which as far as I could tell consisted of whatever coins had the funniest names and the most confusing white papers. It's basically a sure thing, she told me once, pulling up charts on her phone that looked like a heart rate monitor during a panic attack. I just need some capital to really get started. Like, 20 grand should do it. $20,000. She said it like she was asking to borrow a pen. Like that was just pocket change I had lying around, waiting for someone to come up with a sufficiently stupid way to waste it. I said no. Obviously, I'm not an idiot, despite what my marriage would suggest. But Melissa didn't take no for an answer. She took it as a negotiating position. She'd bring it up during dinner, casually mentioning how Lily was really struggling and just needed a little help to get on her feet, conveniently forgetting that Lily had been getting on her feet for about 7 years now and still hadn't figured out which way was up. She'd mention it during car rides, during movies, during any moment when I was relaxed enough to have my guard down, like she was trying to subliminal message me into opening my wallet. They're family, she'd say, using that word like it was a magic spell that automatically entitled people to my money. You help your dad all the time. Why is it different with my siblings? And I'd have to explain, again, that my dad worked 70-hour weeks running a legitimate business that actually served the community, while her siblings worked 0-hour weeks running schemes that mostly served their own delusions. But she'd just shake her head like I was being unreasonable, like I was the problem for not seeing the obvious wisdom in throwing money at people who treated employment like it was optional. It wasn't love anymore. That's the part that hurt the most. The realization that crept up on me slowly like a sunset in reverse. Darkness spreading until suddenly you can't see anything clearly anymore. Our relationship had become a subscription service. One of those things that auto-renews every month and charges your card before you remember to cancel it. And I was the premium member, paying top dollar for features I never asked for and didn't want. Melissa didn't look at me the way she used to, back when we were eating dollar menu items and pretending it was romantic. She didn't light up when I walked in the room or ask about my day because she actually cared about the answer. She looked at me the way you look at your phone when you're checking your bank balance, clinical and evaluative, running calculations about what I could provide versus what she could extract. Every conversation felt like a sales pitch. Every dinner felt like a business meeting where I was being sold on why I should part with more of my income. Her siblings got bolder too, emboldened by Melissa's constant advocacy and my continued silence. Troy started showing up at my apartment uninvited, always with some new scheme that required just a small loan. Bro, I'll totally pay you back. Becca would text me links to business plan templates. Like if she just formatted her delusions professionally enough, I'd suddenly see the genius in selling overpriced sweatshirts with slogans like Mood, Unemployed, and CEO of Doing Nothing. Lily sent me cryptocurrency articles like I was her financial advisor and not just someone she'd ignored for 6 years until I became useful. Still, I kept quiet. I was raised by a man who believed in being polite even when people were being ridiculous, in giving people the benefit of the doubt even when they'd proven they didn't deserve it. I was raised to be accommodating, to not rock the boat, to smile and nod and avoid confrontation because that's what civilized people do. So I smiled through the uncomfortable family dinners where I footed the bill while they ordered the most expensive items on the menu. I nodded through the family meetings where they presented their latest harebrained schemes. I avoided confrontation even as I felt myself shrinking, becoming smaller and quieter in my own life. Until that day. That Tuesday evening when Melissa showed up with her entire family in tow, dressed like they were about to pitch me on Shark Tank, talking about shared family investments, with the kind of confidence that comes from never having been told no. They sat in my living room, in the home I paid for, drinking the coffee I bought, using the Wi-Fi I provided, and laid out their plan for how I could fund all their dreams simultaneously. Translation: they wanted me to be the bank of last resort for their adulthood, the safety net that would let them keep failing without consequences. They wanted me to subsidize Troy's perpetual adolescence, Becca's retail fantasies, and Lily's crypto gambling addiction, all while Melissa smiled and nodded like this was completely reasonable, like this was just what families did. And standing there, listening to them talk about my money like it was a community resource, I finally understood I'd been funding my own exploitation. Every raise, every bonus, every promotion had just made me a bigger target. Success hadn't freed me. It had just made me valuable enough to harvest. 3 days after the ambush at my apartment, Melissa hit me with the follow-up text that every person in a failing relationship dreads. We need to talk. Let's meet at that cafe you like. Just to clear the air. First of all, it wasn't a cafe I liked. It was a cafe she liked because they served $7 lattes with foam art and played indie music that all sounded like someone gently crying into an acoustic guitar. Second, clear the air is code for, I'm going to try to manipulate you in a public setting where you can't react honestly without looking like the bad guy. And third, when someone says, we need to talk, what they really mean is, I need to talk at you while you sit there and take it. But like the idiot I was raised to be, polite to a fault and allergic to confrontation, I said yes. I even showed up 5 minutes early, which in retrospect was a rookie mistake of epic proportions, because it gave me just enough time to sit there nursing an overpriced Americano and contemplate every life choice that had led me to this moment. The cafe was one of those aggressively hip places with exposed brick walls, mismatched vintage furniture that was probably just regular old furniture from Goodwill, and a chalkboard menu written in handwriting so artistic, it was practically illegible. The kind of place where everyone's on their laptop pretending to write a screenplay, but actually just scrolling through Twitter and judging people. I sat at a corner table, watching the door like I was waiting for a root canal, and checked my phone. 5 minutes past our agreed meeting time. Then 10. Then 15. Because of course they were late. Making people wait is a power move, a little psychological game that says, my time is more valuable than yours, and I know you'll sit here like a chump because you're too polite to leave. And they were right. I sat there like the world's most educated chump, watching my coffee get cold while baristas with elaborate tattoos and aggressive nose rings made drinks that cost more than my first car payment. 20 minutes late, they finally rolled in like they were making an entrance at a movie premiere. Melissa led the charge in another outfit that probably cost more than most people's rent, followed by Troy in a Supreme hoodie that was definitely fake. Becca in athleisure where that suggested she was very serious about fitness despite never actually exercising, and Lily bringing up the rear while typing furiously on her phone, probably updating her crypto portfolio or whatever it is that chronically unemployed people do to feel productive. They didn't apologize for being late. Of course they didn't. Melissa just kissed my cheek and said, thanks for waiting, babe. Like I'd had a choice, like this was a favor I was doing instead of a hostage situation with coffee. They arranged themselves around the table and immediately flagged down a server, ordering everything that had a French name and cost more than a reasonable breakfast should. Troy got some kind of avocado toast situation that came with microgreens and cost $15. Becca ordered a matcha latte with oat milk and lavender syrup because apparently regular coffee was too mainstream. Lily got a smoothie bowl that was basically just ice cream disguised as health food, topped with granola that probably cost more per ounce than gold. I watched them order with the kind of casual entitlement that comes from never having to worry about who's picking up the check, and I already knew where this was going. The server looked at me expectantly, and I just gestured to my now cold Americano and said, I'm good. Melissa gave me this look like I was being rude by not ordering more overpriced nonsense. but I was already doing the math in my head. This little, let's clear the air meeting was probably going to cost me $60 before we even got to whatever fresh hell they had planned. Once everyone's artisanal beverages arrived, arranged on the table like we were filming a lifestyle blog, Melissa kicked things off with her political smile, the one that made her look like she was about to ask for a campaign donation. "So," she said, folding her hands on the table like we were in a business meeting, "I wanted us to get together because I feel like there's been some tension lately." She said tension the way someone might say misunderstanding, like the problem was just a communication issue and not the fact that she and her family saw me as a walking ATM with a heartbeat. "We're all family here," she continued, and I felt Troy nod enthusiastically beside her like a bobblehead with a supreme problem. "And family takes care of each other. You've been doing so well at work, and we're really proud of you." The "we're" was doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence, considering her siblings had spent 6 years acting like I was invisible furniture. "So we thought maybe you could help out a little bit. Nothing crazy, just some support while everyone gets on their feet." There it was, the pitch, dressed up in the language of family and mutual support, but really just a shakedown with better PR. "Troy just needs a car," Melissa said, gesturing to her brother like she was presenting evidence in court. "Something reliable so he can get to his DJ gigs. He's got so much potential, he just needs the right equipment to really launch his career." I looked at Troy, this 28-year-old man-child who lived with his mother in a house where he didn't pay rent, eating food he didn't buy, playing music he downloaded illegally off YouTube, and calling it a career. "A car," I repeated slowly, like maybe I'd misheard. "For DJ gigs." "Yeah, man," Troy jumped in, his eyes lighting up like I'd just offered him a record deal. "Just something basic, you know? Like a used Honda, or whatever. 20 grand should cover it. $20,000. For a car. So he could drive to gigs that paid him maybe $100 if he was lucky, which he'd then spend on more equipment he didn't need and wouldn't maintain." The math wasn't mathing, but when has math ever stopped someone from pursuing their dreams at someone else's expense? Before I could respond, Becca leaned forward, her athleisure-clad arms resting on the table like she was about to pitch me on Shark Tank. "And I need a loan for my fashion brand," she said with the kind of confidence that comes from never having heard the word no in any meaningful context. $60,000 should do it. I've got the whole business plan ready. We're talking boutique streetwear, very exclusive, very limited edition. I just need capital to get the inventory going." I stared at her. This woman who'd been launching her fashion brand for 3 years, who'd sold exactly 3 items of clothing all to herself, who thought putting motivational quotes on sweatshirts counted as design innovation. Her brand was called Mood Apparel, and her flagship product was a sweatshirt that said Mood, unemployed, in Helvetica font, which would have been funny if it wasn't so accidentally accurate about her target demographic, which was apparently herself. "Your fashion brand," I said flatly. "The one where you sell sweatshirts with slogans." "They're not just slogans," Becca said defensively, like I'd insulted her artistic vision. "They're statements. They're mood expressions. It's very trendy right now. I just need the capital to scale up production and marketing." "You've sold 3 sweatshirts," I pointed out, probably more harshly than I should have, but also exactly as harshly as the situation required. "That's because I haven't had the budget to properly market," she shot back. "If you invest in me, I can hire a social media manager, get influencers to promote the brand, really get it off the ground. This is a ground floor opportunity." "Ground floor of what?" I wanted to ask. "A building with no foundation?" But before I could, Lily chimed in, because apparently we were going around the table listing all the ways I could light my money on fire. "I need help with my student loans," she said, not looking up from her phone, where she was probably watching her crypto investments crater in real time. "And maybe some capital to invest in this new token that's about to blow up. It's called Moondoge or something. Very promising." I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, tried to find that Zen place therapists are always talking about, that calm center where you can respond to insanity without losing your mind. Failed completely. "Let me get this straight," I said, opening my eyes and looking at each of them in turn. "You want me to buy Troy a car for a career that doesn't exist, fund Becca's sweatshirt empire that no one wants to buy from, and help Lily gamble on cryptocurrency with a name that sounds like a joke?" "It's not gambling," Lily protested. "It's investing." You want to invest in something called Moondoge, I said slowly. And you don't see the problem with that sentence. Melissa squeezed my hand across the table, her perfectly manicured nails digging slightly into my skin. Honey, she said in that voice, that soft, manipulative voice that she used when she wanted something and thought being sweet would get it for her. It's just money. You'll make more. You're always making more. And they really need this. We're family. This is what family does. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw absolutely nothing that resembled the woman I'd married. This was a stranger wearing my wife's face, running a con I'd been too stupid or too in love to see clearly. I looked at her siblings, these 3 adults who'd built their entire life strategy around avoiding responsibility and outsourcing their problems to anyone dumb enough to help. And then I leaned back in my chair, smiled, and said the most liberating word in the English language. No. The table went silent. Like I'd just announced I was joining a cult or moving to Antarctica. Melissa's hand tightened on mine. No, she repeated, like she'd never heard the word before. No, I confirmed. Not happening. Not now, not ever. You want to know why? Because Troy doesn't need a car, he needs a job. Becca doesn't need 60 grand. She needs to accept that her business failed and move on. And Lily doesn't need investment capital. She needs to finish her degree and get literally any form of employment that doesn't involve gambling on internet coins named after memes. Troy's mouth fell open. Becca looked like I'd slapped her. Lily finally looked up from her phone. Melissa's face did this thing where it froze mid-smile, like bad Wi-Fi buffering. Her expression stuck between pleasant and homicidal. Chapter 5, The Uninvited Family Meeting. You know that feeling when you finally stand up for yourself, set a boundary, and feel like maybe, just maybe, you've taken control of your life? That lasted approximately 48 hours before reality reminded me that narcissists don't accept boundaries. They just see them as challenges to overcome. 2 days after the cafe disaster, where I'd committed the apparently unforgivable sin of refusing to bankroll 3 grown adults' delusions, I was sitting on my couch in blessed peace, watching some Netflix show I wasn't really paying attention to because my brain was too busy processing the fact that I might actually need to divorce my wife and her entire extended family. I had my laptop balanced on my knees, a beer going lukewarm on the coffee table, and for the first time in months, I felt something almost like peace. The apartment was quiet. No one was asking me for money. The apartment was quiet. No one was asking me for money. No one was explaining why their failed business just needed one more cash injection to really take off. It was just me, some mediocre television, and the gentle hum of my air conditioning reminding me that I could afford to be comfortable. This, I thought, is what happiness feels like. Just silence and the absence of people trying to rob you. Then the doorbell rang. I should have known. I should have felt it in my bones, that disturbance in the force that happens when entitled people decide they're not done with you yet. But like an idiot, I thought maybe it was actually a delivery this time, or a neighbor asking to borrow something reasonable like a cup of sugar instead of $20,000. I shuffled to the door in my sweatpants and a t-shirt that had seen better days, not bothering to check the peephole, because apparently I hate myself and love being ambushed. I opened the door, and there they were. All of them. Melissa, Troy, Becca, and Lily, standing in my doorway like the world's worst surprise party, dressed like they were about to conduct an intervention or possibly a hostage negotiation. Melissa had this determined look on her face, the kind that says, "We're going to talk about this whether you want to or not." And her siblings flanked her like backup singers in the worst concert ever performed. "We need to talk," Melissa announced, and before I could say literally anything, they were walking past me into my apartment like they owned the place, like I'd invited them, like this was completely normal behavior and not a home invasion with a smile. Come in, I guess," I said to no one, closing the door, because what else was I going to do? Chase them out with a broom? Call the cops and explain that my wife and her siblings had committed the crime of showing up uninvited? I was raised too polite for effective self-defense, a character flaw that was becoming increasingly problematic. They arranged themselves in my living room like they were setting up for a board meeting. Melissa took the armchair, her siblings spread out on my couch, and I was left standing there like a contestant on a game show I didn't remember signing up for. "So," I said, trying to keep my voice level and failing. "What's this about?" "We wanted to talk about the other day," Becca started. crossing her arms like I was the one being unreasonable. You were really harsh, and I think you owe us an apology. I blinked, processed that sentence, tried to find the reality where it made sense. Failed completely. I owe you an apology, I repeated slowly, for not giving you $60,000 for sweatshirts that say mood, unemployed. It's not about the money. Melissa jumped in, which was the biggest lie told in my apartment since I told myself this marriage was working. It's about family. It's about supporting each other. You really hurt their feelings. I hurt their feelings, I said, and I could hear my voice getting that edge to it. That sharpness that comes right before you stop being polite and start being honest. By not funding their lifestyle choices. Got it. Anyone want a drink? Because I'm going to need several to get through this conversation. I walked to the kitchen, mostly to give myself a moment to breathe and not say something I'd regret, which in hindsight was stupid because I should have been saying all the things I'd regret. I grabbed some glasses, filled them with water because I wasn't about to waste my good beer on people who thought I owed them an apology for having boundaries. And when I came back to the living room, I found Troy sitting at my desk, in my office, at my laptop. My laptop that I'd left open because I was in my own home and didn't think I needed to password protect my space from family members with sticky fingers and no sense of personal boundaries. Hey man, Troy said casually, like he hadn't just committed what was essentially a home invasion of my digital life. I was just looking for the bathroom and saw your setup. Nice specs. But he wasn't looking at my specs. He was looking at my banking app, which I'd left open on the screen like the trusting idiot I apparently was, showing my savings account balance in all its comma-filled glory. Something in my brain snapped. Not like a twig, but like a bridge cable under too much weight. That moment when structural integrity just gives up and everything comes crashing down. Get away from my laptop, I said, and my voice came out quiet, which is somehow scarier than yelling. Right now. Troy looked up, grinning like he'd just discovered buried treasure, instead of violating every possible boundary a human being could have. Bro, relax. I was just curious. But wow, you've got serious savings. You could help us out easy. This is like nothing to you. Nothing, I repeated, setting the glasses down before I threw them. You think my savings are nothing? I mean, yeah. Troy shrugged, that infuriating shrug that people do when they think they're being reasonable. You've got like 6 figures just sitting there. What are you saving it for? You could help family right now. I walked over to my desk, closed my laptop with more force than necessary, and turned to look at Troy with what I can only imagine was the expression of a man who's reached the absolute limit of his patience. Sure, I said calmly, which was a warning sign he was too stupid to read. I could help you out easy. But then who helps me out after prison when I murder you for touching my laptop without permission? The room went dead silent. Melissa jumped up from the armchair like I'd just threatened to burn the building down, which honestly was less of a violation than what her brother had just done. That's not funny, she said, but her voice had that nervous edge to it, like maybe she was starting to realize she'd pushed too far. You're right, I agreed. It's not funny. You know what else isn't funny? Coming into my home uninvited, going through my personal files, looking at my private financial information, and then having the audacity to tell me it's nothing. That's not funny. That's criminal. We're family, Lily chimed in from the couch, finally looking up from her phone where she was probably watching her crypto investments burn. Family doesn't keep secrets from each other. Family also doesn't commit identity theft, I shot back. Family doesn't hack each other's accounts. Family doesn't show up uninvited and root through each other's personal information like they're shopping at a yard sale. But apparently, we have different definitions of family. Becca stood up, her face flushed with what I can only assume was righteous indignation, which takes some serious mental gymnastics when you're the one who's wrong. You're being really selfish right now, she announced, like she was delivering a verdict. We're just asking for help. We're struggling. You're struggling because you don't work? I said, and the words came out sharper than I intended, but exactly as sharp as they needed to be. You're struggling because you think a real job is beneath you, because you'd rather chase pipe dreams and blame everyone else when they don't pan out. That's not struggling. That's called consequences. Melissa tried damage control, moving toward me with her hands out like she was approaching a wild animal. Babe, they were just curious. It's not that big of a deal. Let's all just calm down and talk about this like adults. Talk about it like adults, I repeated, and I felt something like laughter bubbling up in my chest, the kind of laugh that comes when you realize just how absurd your life has become. Okay, let's talk like adults. Adults don't go through other people's computers. Adults don't show up at someone's house uninvited and demand money. Adults don't spend 6 years ignoring someone and then suddenly act like family when that person becomes successful. So if we're talking like adults, how about you all act like some? Troy was still at my desk, looking sullen like a teenager who'd just been grounded, and I had this moment of clarity where I realized I was angrier than I'd been in years. Not the quiet, simmering anger that you push down and ignore, but the hot, bright anger that comes when people violate your space and then act like you're the problem for being upset about it. I think you all need to leave, I said, and my voice was steady now. Calm in that way that comes when you've made a decision and nothing's going to change your mind. Right now, get out of my apartment. We're not done talking, Melissa said, but there was uncertainty in her voice now, like maybe she was starting to realize she'd miscalculated. Yes, we are, I said. We're done talking. We're done with surprise visits. We're done with you treating me like a community resource. We're done with all of it. Get out. They stood there for a moment, frozen in that awkward space between defiance and compliance, and I watched them do the mental math, trying to figure out if they could still salvage this, still turn it around, still somehow make me the bad guy for having boundaries. But something in my face must have told them they were out of moves, out of manipulation tactics, out of leverage. Melissa grabbed her purse, her face doing that thing where it cycles through emotions like a slot machine, landing somewhere between hurt and furious. You're going to regret this, she said, which is what people always say when they're losing an argument and need to feel like they're still in control. I already regret it, I said. That's why you're leaving. They filed out one by one. Troy shooting me resentful looks like I was the bad guy in this scenario. Becca muttering under her breath about how I'd changed and money had made me cold. Lily still on her phone like this whole thing was just a minor inconvenience in her day. Melissa paused at the door, turned back like she was about to say something profound or devastating or both, but I held up my hand. Don't, I said. Just don't. Whatever you're about to say, save it. I'm done. She left in offended silence. That particular silence that entitled people create when they've been denied something they thought they deserved, and I closed the door behind them with a finality that felt like the end of something. I stood there for a moment, back against the door, listening to their voices fade down the hallway, and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Relief. Pure, unadulterated relief. The sound of entitlement retreating. You'd think that after publicly telling your wife's entire family to kick rocks at an overpriced cafe, you'd earn yourself at least a few days of peace and quiet. Maybe a week of awkward silence where everyone pretends the confrontation never happened while secretly plotting their next move. But no, that would require them to have shame, self-awareness, or literally any ability to read a room. Instead, I got exactly 48 hours of blessed silence before the universe decided I hadn't suffered enough and sent them back for round 2. It was a Thursday night, one of those perfect evenings where you've managed to leave work at a reasonable hour, your boss isn't breathing down your neck about quarterly reports, and you've got absolutely nothing planned except becoming one with your couch and finally finding out what happens in that Netflix series you've been watching for 3 months. I'd changed into my official uniform of comfort. Old college sweatpants that had seen better decades, a t-shirt with a hole in the armpit that I refused to throw away, and those ridiculous fuzzy socks that Melissa had bought me as a joke, but turned out to be the most comfortable things I'd ever worn. I had my laptop balanced on my knees, a beer within arm's reach that was actually cold for once because I'd remembered to put it in the fridge more than 5 minutes before wanting to drink it, and I was approximately 7 minutes into an episode when I heard it. The doorbell. That awful, intrusive sound that never brings good news after 7 p.m. Nobody rings your doorbell at night with good news. Publishers Clearinghouse isn't showing up. The Lottery Commission isn't hand-delivering your winnings. It's either Jehovah's Witnesses who haven't learned about reasonable visiting hours, or it's people you really don't want to see. I paused the show, considered pretending I wasn't home, but my car was in the driveway and the lights were clearly on. So unless I wanted to crouch in the dark like a criminal in my own apartment, I was trapped. I shuffled to the door in my fuzzy socks, already knowing in my gut that whatever was on the other side of that door was going to ruin my evening, and probably my week, and possibly my entire life trajectory. I opened it, And there they were, Melissa and the entire sibling circus, standing on my doorstep like the world's worst caroling group. No warning text. No courtesy call. Just four people who apparently thought my home was a public space they could access whenever the mood struck. Melissa had that determined look on her face, the one that said she'd prepared a speech and was going to deliver it whether I wanted to hear it or not. Troy was wearing headphones around his neck like a fashion accessory, because of course he was. Becca had her phone out, probably ready to document this intervention for her Instagram story. And Lily was carrying a folder, which was somehow more ominous than anything else. "We need to talk," Melissa announced, and before I could tell them that no, we absolutely did not need to talk and in fact should probably never talk again, they were walking past me into my apartment like they owned the place. Troy beelined straight for my sound system because apparently respecting boundaries was a foreign concept to him. Becca made herself comfortable on my couch, putting her feet up on my coffee table like she paid rent. Lily set her mysterious folder down and started looking around my apartment with this evaluative expression that made me deeply uncomfortable. "Can I get you guys anything to drink?" I asked, because my parents raised me to be polite even when people were actively invading my personal space, and also because I needed a minute to process what was happening and figure out my exit strategy from this nightmare. "Water's fine," Melissa said, settling into my armchair like she was hosting a talk show. "We won't take up too much of your time. We just wanted to follow up on our conversation from the other day." Follow up. Like we'd left things open-ended. Like I hadn't explicitly told them all to take a hike and fund their own delusions. I went to the kitchen, grabbed some waters I didn't really want to give them, and tried to figure out how fast I could reasonably kick four people out of my apartment without looking like a complete monster. The answer was, not fast enough. When I came back with the drinks, I noticed Troy had wandered off. Not into the bathroom. Not to look at my bookshelf like a normal nosy person. No, this man had walked straight into my home office like it was a public library. I could see him through the doorway, sitting at my desk, and then I heard the sound that made my blood pressure spike so fast I'm surprised I didn't have a stroke right there. Keyboard typing. I walked over, still holding the waters like an idiot, and found him scrolling through my laptop. My open, unlocked, currently displaying my banking app laptop. He had pulled up my financial information like he was checking the weather, his eyes wide as he stared at numbers that were absolutely none of his business. "Bro," he said, turning to me with this huge grin that I wanted to slap off his face. "You got savings. Like, real savings. You could help us out easy. This is nothing to you." I stood there, waters in hand, watching this grown man violate my privacy with the casual entitlement of someone who'd never been told no in any meaningful way, and I felt something inside me snap. Not like a twig breaking, more like a dam finally giving way after years of pressure. The polite part of me, the part that had been raised to accommodate and avoid confrontation and always give people the benefit of the doubt, just packed up its bags and left. "Sure," I said, my voice so calm it scared even me. "I could help you out easy. But then who's going to help me out after I go to prison for murder when I throw you through that window for touching my laptop without permission?" The room went dead silent. Troy's grin faltered. Melissa jumped up from the armchair. "He was just curious," she said, rushing over like she could somehow defuse the situation with her presence. "He didn't mean anything by it. Right, Troy?" "Yeah, man, I was just—" "Get away from my desk," I interrupted, setting the waters down before I threw them. "Get out of my office. And get your hands off my personal property before I call the cops and report you for attempted identity theft." "Identity theft?" Troy sputtered, finally backing away from the computer. "I was just looking. You were accessing my financial information without permission," I said, each word coming out clipped and cold. "That's a crime. That's actually multiple crimes. Breaking and entering unauthorized access to financial data and being an insufferable mooch, though I'm not sure that last one is technically illegal, but it should be." Becca stood up from the couch, her phone still in her hand, like she was thinking about recording this. "You're being dramatic. We're family. Family shares things. Family doesn't hack into each other's bank accounts," I shot back. "Family doesn't show up uninvited to someone's house and start going through their private information like it's a public record. Family doesn't treat each other like personal funding sources for their failed life choices." Failed life choices. Becca's voice went up about 3 octaves. "I'm trying to build a business. You're trying to build a business on someone else's money, I corrected. There's a difference. A business involves risk, investment, and actual work. What you're doing is called mooching with branding. Lily finally spoke up from her position near the coffee table, her folders still unopened. We just thought that since you have so much, you could share a little. It's not like it would hurt you. It's not like it would hurt me. I repeated slowly, feeling my blood pressure climbing into stroke territory. You know what has hurt me? Coming home after a long day at work to find my wife and her siblings breaking into my office and going through my personal files. That hurts me. Having people I'm supposed to trust treating me like a resource to be exploited hurts me. Being seen as nothing more than a paycheck with legs hurts me. Melissa tried to take my hand, but I stepped back. Baby, you're overreacting. Nobody broke into anything. The door was unlocked. The door to my office is always unlocked because I live here alone, and I should be able to trust that people won't go through my things. My voice was rising now, all that careful calm evaporating like water on hot asphalt. I should be able to leave my laptop open without worrying that someone's going to snoop through my bank accounts. I should be able to exist in my own home without it turning into a financial planning session for people who've never planned anything in their lives. Troy was edging toward the door now, finally reading the room about 45 minutes too late. Look, man, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. You're right. I cut him off. You shouldn't have. And you know what else you shouldn't have done? You shouldn't have asked me for 20 grand for a car. You shouldn't have treated me like I was invisible for 6 years until I became useful. You shouldn't have created a group chat called Family Opportunities where you all strategized about how to get money out of me like I'm some kind of mission objective. Melissa's face went pale. How did you? You left your phone unlocked, I said. Remember? Same way Troy just went through my laptop. Funny how invasion of privacy is only a problem when you're on the receiving end. Becca was gathering her things, stuffing her phone in her designer bag that I'd probably indirectly paid for through Melissa's shopping sprees. We were just trying to help each other out. That's what families do. No, I said firmly, walking to the door and opening it wide. That's what you wanted me to do for you. There's a difference. A family supports each other. What you wanted was a one-way transaction where I fund everyone's lifestyle and get nothing in return except the privilege of being related to you. They filed toward the door slowly, like criminals being escorted out of a building. Melissa lingered, her eyes wet with what I'm sure she thought were convincing tears. I can't believe you're throwing us out, she whispered. I can't believe you brought your entire family to my house uninvited to pressure me into giving you money. I countered. So I guess we're both surprised. They left in offended silence, that particular kind of quiet that comes from people who know they're wrong but are too proud to admit it. The sound of entitlement retreating, of people who'd expected one outcome and gotten another, of a con that had finally collapsed under its own weight. I closed the door behind them, locked it, and stood there for a moment, my heart pounding, my hands shaking slightly from adrenaline. Then I went back to my couch, picked up my beer, and pressed play on my Netflix show. It tasted like victory. I woke up the next morning feeling lighter than I had in months, like I'd been carrying around a backpack full of rocks, and someone had finally told me I could put it down. The sun was streaming through my bedroom window in that optimistic way it does when you've had a good night's sleep and haven't been woken up by the sound of entitled family members invading your personal space. I actually smiled while making coffee, which should have been my first warning sign that the universe was about to drop-kick me back into chaos. Because happiness is apparently a privilege the cosmos only grants you in short bursts before reminding you that life is essentially a series of unfortunate events with occasional pizza breaks. My phone rang while I was still in that blissful post-caffeine haze, before my brain had fully booted up for the day. I looked at the screen and saw Dad lighting up, which was unusual because my father was not a morning call kind of guy. He was a text me and I'll respond in 3 to 5 business days kind of guy. A man who treated his phone like it was a necessary evil rather than an extension of his body like everyone under 40. So a call at 8:15 in the morning meant something was either very wrong or very important, and given my recent track record, I was betting on wrong. Hey, Dad, I answered, trying to keep my voice casual even though my stomach was already doing that pre-panic twist that happens when you know bad news is incoming. Everything okay? Son, he said, and his voice had that tight quality to it, that controlled anger that Southern men use when they're trying real hard not to lose their temper, because they were raised to believe that yelling is undignified. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me. My coffee suddenly tasted like anxiety. Sure, what's up? Did you give Melissa permission to access my email account? The world tilted slightly on its axis. What? My email? He repeated, slower this time, like he was talking to someone who didn't speak English. Someone logged into it from an IP address in Orlando. Changed some settings. Went through my messages. The security alert said it was accessed 3 days ago, right around the time you would have been at work. I checked with the email provider, and they confirmed someone logged in using my password. I sat down on my couch because my legs suddenly felt unreliable. Dad, I swear to God, I didn't give her your password. I didn't even know she knew your email address. That's what I thought, he said, and I could hear him taking a deep breath, that thing he did when he was trying to maintain his composure. So let me tell you what I found. Someone went through every email I've sent you in the past year. Every single one. They also accessed the folder where I keep my bank statements, the ones I forward to my accountant. And here's the interesting part. They specifically opened all the emails where we discussed you sending me money for the diner. My blood went cold. Not the metaphorical cold where you feel a chill, but the actual physical sensation of all the warmth draining from my body like someone had pulled a plug. She was checking to see how much I was giving you. That's exactly what she was doing, Dad confirmed, his voice getting harder. She was tracking your finances through me, using my email like it was some kind of surveillance system. And son, I don't know what kind of marriage you've got going on, but in my day, when someone had to hack their way into information, it usually meant they didn't have any right to know it in the first place. I closed my eyes, feeling the last few months clicking into place like a puzzle I'd been too stupid or too hopeful to solve. The sudden interest in my father's health. Melissa asking casual questions about the diner's renovations. Her comments about how generous I was being with my family. It hadn't been concern or curiosity. It had been reconnaissance. She'd been building a case, gathering data, figuring out exactly how much money I had and where it was going so she could calculate how much she could extract. How did she even get your password? I asked, though I already knew the answer was going to make me want to throw my phone through the window. Well, that's the thing, Dad said, and I could hear him moving around, probably pacing in his kitchen the way he did when he was working through something that bothered him. My password was your mother's maiden name and the year we got married. Same password I've used for 20 years because I'm old and I don't like changing things. But the only people who would know that information are family. People I trust. People I've told stories to about your mother, about our wedding, about our life together. She used your trust like a password reset link. I said quietly, feeling something hard and cold settle in my chest where my heart used to be. That's about the size of it, Dad agreed. And son, I'm going to be real honest with you right now because that's what fathers do even when it's uncomfortable. This isn't normal. This isn't wife behavior. This is criminal behavior dressed up in a wedding ring. People who love you don't hack into your family's email accounts to track your money. People who love you don't treat your generosity like it's evidence they can use against you. I sat there on my couch, holding my phone, staring at my coffee table where Troy had put his feet up just hours earlier, and I felt the last remaining thread of my marriage snap. Not fray, not weaken, but completely break with an almost audible snap that echoed through my entire understanding of the past 6 years. Because this wasn't just about asking for money. This wasn't just about her siblings being entitled or her having expensive taste. This was calculated. This was premeditated. This was fraud with feelings attached. I'm calling my lawyer, I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. Right now? Before lunch. Possibly before I finish this coffee. That's probably smart, Dad said, and I could hear the relief in his voice, like he'd been worried I was going to defend her or make excuses. You want me to send you the security logs? The proof that someone accessed my account. Send everything. I told him. Timestamps, IP addresses, which emails they opened, how long they spent reading them. Send it all. I want documentation of every single thing she did. Already forwarded it to you, he said. Check your email. And son, I'm proud of you. I know this isn't easy, but you're doing the right thing. Your mother would be proud too. We hung up, and I sat there for another minute, just breathing, trying to process the fact that my wife had committed what was essentially identity theft against my father to spy on my finances. Then I opened my email, confirmed that Dad had sent everything, and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I needed. Marcus Green, attorney at law, the guy I'd met at a networking event 2 years ago, who'd given me his card and said, "Call me if you ever need help with anything." And I mean anything. Contracts, disputes, divorces, whatever. At the time, I'd laughed and said I hoped I'd never need to use it. At the time, I'd been an idiot. I called him at 8:30 in the morning, which was probably rude, but Marcus was the kind of lawyer who billed $400 an hour and probably started his day at 5 a.m. doing hot yoga or whatever successful people do before normal humans are conscious. He answered on the second ring. "This is Marcus." "Marcus, this is the guy from the data analytics conference. We met at the hotel bar, talked about basketball and contract law." "I remember," he said, and I could hear him switching gears, his voice shifting from casual to professional. "What can I do for you?" "I need to divorce a woman and her entire family," I said. "Preferably before lunch, but I'm flexible on timing." There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "That's a record request, but I like your style. Tell me what's going on." So I told him. Everything. The cafe ambush, the home invasion, Troy going through my laptop, and now the email hacking that had apparently been going on for weeks or months, or however long Melissa had been playing detective with my father's account. I sent him the security logs while we were talking, heard him clicking through them on his computer, making those little and interesting sounds that lawyers make when they're calculating billable hours and case strategies. "Okay," he said when I finally finished. "Here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to gather every piece of evidence you have. Screenshots, recordings, emails, bank statements, anything that shows a pattern of financial coercion and unauthorized access to information. Second, we're going to file for divorce on the grounds of irreconcilable differences, which is lawyer speak for, your wife is a nightmare and you want out. Third, we're going to pursue charges for the unauthorized access to your father's email account, because that's actually a federal crime under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act." "It is?" I asked, feeling a small spark of satisfaction ignite in my chest. "Oh yeah," Marcus said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Accessing someone's email without permission, especially to gather financial information? That's unauthorized access to a protected computer. It's the same law they use to prosecute hackers. And the fact that she did it to track your money makes it even worse because it shows intent and premeditation." "So what you're saying is," I said slowly, "she committed a federal crime to figure out how much money she could get from me." "That's exactly what I'm saying," Marcus confirmed. "And we're going to make sure the court knows it. Do you happen to have that recording you mentioned? The one where her brother called you a walking ATM?" I pulled up my phone, scrolled through my voice memos, and found it. That night 2 weeks ago when Troy had been drunk at a family dinner, laughing with Becca about how they'd finally found their cash cow and didn't have to worry about money anymore because I'd take care of everything. I'd recorded it on my phone under the table, not because I was planning to use it, but because I couldn't believe what I was hearing and wanted proof that I wasn't crazy. "I've got it," I told Marcus. "Audio's pretty clear too." "Perfect," he said. "Send that over. Also, start documenting everything. Every interaction, every text message, every time they contact you asking for money. We're building a case here, and the more evidence we have, the faster this goes, and the better protected you are." "How long is this going to take?" I asked, suddenly feeling very tired. "Depends on how cooperative they are," Marcus said. "If they fight it, could be 6 months to a year. If they're smart and realize they don't have a leg to stand on, we could have preliminary hearings done in a few weeks. Either way, you're going to be fine. Trust me, I've seen way worse situations than this, and the people who have documentation and evidence always come out on top." We talked for another 20 minutes, going over details and logistics, and all the legal jargon that makes your brain hurt if you think about it too hard. By the time we hung up, I had a plan, a lawyer, and something I hadn't felt in months: hope. If karma had a playlist, I thought, pulling up my laptop and starting to organize all my evidence into folders, I was about to hit play. And the opening track was going to be absolutely devastating. 3 weeks later, I found myself sitting in a courtroom that looked exactly like every courtroom you've ever seen on TV, except somehow more depressing and with worse lighting. The kind of fluorescent overhead lights that make everyone look like they're auditioning for a zombie movie, bouncing off wood paneling that was probably installed during the Nixon administration and hadn't been updated since. Marcus sat next to me in a suit that probably cost more than my first car, looking calm and collected like this was just another Tuesday for him, which it probably was. Meanwhile, I was sweating through my shirt despite the aggressive air conditioning, trying to remember to breathe like a normal human being instead of someone having a prolonged panic attack. Across the aisle sat Melissa and her lawyer, some guy named Richard who looked like he advertised on bus benches and had definitely lost more cases than he'd won. Melissa was dressed like she was attending a funeral, all black and tasteful pearls, with makeup that made her look pale and sympathetic. The performance of a lifetime, really. Behind her sat the unholy trinity, Troy, Becca, and Lily, all dressed up like they were going to church, probably thinking their presence would somehow sway the judge into believing this was a loving family being torn apart by my selfishness rather than a group of grifters who'd gotten caught. The judge entered, a woman in her 60s named Judge Patricia Morrison, who had the kind of face that suggested she'd heard every excuse in the book and believed exactly none of them. She looked at the case file, looked at us, and sighed like she was already tired and we hadn't even started yet. "All right," she said, settling into her chair. "Let's make this quick. I've got 12 more cases today and a dental appointment at 4. Mr. Green, you're representing the petitioner. Make your case." Marcus stood up, and I watched him transform from casual lawyer into courtroom predator in about 2 seconds flat. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward case of financial coercion, unauthorized access to private information, and a pattern of manipulative behavior that constitutes grounds for immediate dissolution of marriage. My client has documentation of his wife and her family repeatedly demanding money, accessing his personal financial information without permission, and, most egregiously, hacking into his father's email account to track monetary transfers." I watched Melissa's face go from sympathetic widow to shocked defendant in real time. Her lawyer started flipping through papers like he'd just realized he was in way over his head. Judge Morrison raised an eyebrow. "Hacking?" "Yes, Your Honor." Marcus pulled out the security logs, the timestamps, everything my dad had sent me. Mrs. Miles accessed Franklin Miles's email account without authorization, using personal information she'd gathered through conversation to guess his password. She then systematically went through his correspondence with my client to track financial transactions. This constitutes unauthorized access under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. The courtroom got very quiet. Even Troy stopped fidgeting. Melissa's lawyer, Richard, stood up like someone had just electrocuted his chair. "Your Honor, my client was simply trying to understand the family's financial situation. There was no malicious intent. She hacked someone's email." Judge Morrison interrupted, looking at Richard like he'd just suggested the sky was green. "That's not understanding a financial situation. That's committing a crime. Continue, Mr. Green." Marcus pulled out his phone, connected it to the courtroom's audio system with the kind of smooth confidence that comes from doing this about 1,000 times, and said, "Your Honor, I'd like to play an audio recording that demonstrates the nature of this relationship." He pressed play, and suddenly Troy's drunk voice filled the courtroom, laughing and slurring through the story of how they'd finally found their cash cow and didn't have to worry about money anymore because I was their personal bank with a heartbeat. Becca's voice chimed in, giggling about how they should have gotten me to marry into the family years ago. The recording was maybe 90 seconds long, but it felt like an eternity, watching Melissa's face cycle through approximately 17 different emotions before settling on something between mortified and furious. When it finished, Judge Morrison looked at Melissa like she was something unpleasant that had been tracked in on someone's shoe. "Mrs. Miles, do you have anything to say about this recording?" Melissa stood up, and I have to give her credit. She went full theatrical. Her eyes filled with tears, her voice cracked with emotion, and she delivered a performance that would have won her an Oscar if this were a movie and not real life. "Your Honor, I love my husband. I've always loved him. Yes, my family has had some financial struggles, and yes, I asked him for help, but that's what spouses do. They help each other. They support each other's families. I never tried to steal from him or manipulate him. I just wanted us to be there for my siblings during a difficult time." "By hacking his father's email?" Judge Morrison asked, clearly not buying any of this. "I didn't hack anything," Melissa protested, the tears flowing freely now. I knew his password because he'd mentioned it in conversation once. I was worried about our finances, about whether we could afford to help my family, so I checked to see how much he was sending to his father. That's not a crime. That's just being concerned about our household budget. Marcus leaned over and whispered to me, should I mention she tried to transfer 10 grand from your savings? I looked at him, looked at Melissa crying her perfectly calculated tears, looked at her siblings sitting there like they were the victims in this situation, and said, loud enough for the microphone to pick up, yes. But make it sound like a bedtime story. Marcus grinned, stood back up, and said, Your Honor, if I may add one more piece of evidence to demonstrate Mrs. Miles's concern for the household budget. He pulled out bank statements, highlighted and annotated, showing a transfer attempt from my savings account to Melissa's personal account. $10,000. Initiated at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday when I was asleep. Rejected by the bank's fraud detection system because it flagged the transaction as suspicious. The judge's eyebrows climbed so high they nearly touched her hairline. She took the statements, read through them slowly, and then looked at Melissa with an expression that could have frozen hell. You tried to transfer $10,000 from your husband's account while he was sleeping? I was going to tell him. Melissa stammered, her tears suddenly looking a lot less convincing. It was just temporary. I was going to pay it back. With what money? Marcus asked, his voice dripping with the kind of polite skepticism that destroys people in court. You haven't had a job in 8 months. You've spent an average of $4,000 a month on personal purchases. Where exactly were you planning to get $10,000 to pay back your husband? Melissa opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again like a fish trying to breathe air. Her lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Troy, Becca, and Lily were all staring at different corners of the room, suddenly very interested in the architecture. Judge Morrison shuffled through the papers, made some notes, and then looked up with the kind of expression that meant someone's day was about to get a whole lot worse. I've seen enough. Mr. Miles, I'm granting your petition for divorce. Mrs. Miles, you and your family are hereby issued a restraining order for unauthorized access to private information and attempted financial fraud. You are to stay at least 500 feet away from Mr. Miles and his father at all times. Any violation will result in immediate arrest and criminal charges. She banged her gavel, and the sound echoed through the courtroom like thunder. We're done here. Next case. Melissa's lawyer tried to object, but Judge Morrison was already gathering her files and standing up. The bailiff gestured for us to exit, and Marcus packed up his briefcase with the satisfied efficiency of a man who'd just won exactly what he expected to win. As we walked out of the courtroom, I could hear Melissa behind me, her voice rising in pitch as she tried to argue with her lawyer, tried to explain, tried to somehow undo what had just happened. Her siblings were arguing with each other, playing the blame game. Troy accusing Becca of making things worse by being on that recording, Lily snapping at both of them for being idiots. In the hallway, Becca caught up to us, her face red with anger and humiliation. She pointed at me like I was personally responsible for ruining her life and hissed, You're going to regret this. All of this. We're family, and you just destroyed that. You'll regret it. I stopped walking, turned to face her, and felt something settle in my chest that might have been peace, or might have been exhaustion, or might have been the simple satisfaction of finally being free. I smiled, not the fake polite smile I'd been wearing for years, but a real genuine smile that came from somewhere deep and honest. I already did regret it, I said calmly. That's why we're here. Marcus put his hand on my shoulder, steering me away from the train wreck that was Melissa's family imploding in a courthouse hallway, and we walked out into the sunlight. Behind us, I could hear them still arguing, still trying to figure out who to blame, still refusing to accept that maybe, just maybe, they were the architects of their own disaster. The fresh air hit my face, and I took a deep breath, the first truly free breath I'd taken in what felt like years. You know that saying about how news travels fast in small towns? Well, it turns out news travels at approximately the speed of light, when that news involves someone trying to scam their husband and getting absolutely destroyed in court. Melissa and her siblings lived in one of those Florida towns where everyone knows everyone, where the local diner is also the community gossip hub, and where a juicy scandal spreads faster than a wildfire in a fireworks factory. Within 48 hours of our court date, everyone within a 50-mile radius knew that Melissa Miles had hacked her father-in-law's email, tried to steal 10 grand from her sleeping husband, and got slapped with a restraining order for her troubles. I didn't have to do anything. Didn't have to post on social media, didn't have to tell anyone my side of the story, didn't have to engage in any kind of public relations campaign. The court records were public, the restraining order was documented, and apparently Richard the busbench lawyer had a secretary who was cousins with someone who worked at the local grocery store. And that's all it took. The truth spread like butter on hot toast, and there was absolutely nothing Melissa or her siblings could do to stop it. I found out about the fallout through my dad, who called me one evening about a week after the trial, laughing so hard he could barely get the words out. "Son," he wheezed, "you need to hear what's happening down here. It's like watching dominoes fall, except the dominoes are people's reputations and terrible life choices." Becca's boutique was the first casualty. Turns out when people find out you're part of a family that tried to financially exploit someone, they're not super eager to buy your overpriced sweatshirts with motivational slogans. Her Instagram page, which had been struggling along with about 300 followers, half of which were probably bots, lost 200 followers in 3 days. The comments section became a war zone of people roasting her business model, her ethics, and her fashion sense. Someone created a parody account called Mood Unemployable that got more engagement in a week than her real account had gotten in 3 years. Her physical boutique space, a small corner shop she'd been renting month to month, emptied out faster than a movie theater after someone yells fire. She'd had maybe 5 regular customers, and all 5 of them apparently decided that supporting local business was only important when the local business owner wasn't part of a criminal conspiracy. Within 2 weeks, I heard through the grapevine that she'd closed up shop, packed up her inventory of unsold sweatshirts, and was trying to sell everything on Facebook Marketplace for pennies on the dollar. Nobody was buying. Turns out Mood Unemployed hits different when it's not ironic. Troy's DJ career, which had never really been a career so much as an expensive hobby funded by delusion and borrowed equipment, completely imploded. The few gigs he'd managed to book, mostly high school parties and the occasional wedding reception for people who didn't have the budget for a real DJ, all got canceled. Parents didn't want him around their kids. Couples didn't want him at their weddings. Even the sketchy dive bars that usually let anyone with a laptop and a Spotify account perform suddenly had scheduling conflicts whenever he called. But the real kicker was his equipment getting repossessed. Turns out Troy had financed all his DJ gear, the mixer, the speakers, the lights, the whole setup, on credit with the promise that his upcoming gigs would let him make the payments. When the gigs dried up and he couldn't make even the minimum payments, the financing company came knocking. I heard they literally showed up at his mom's house where he was living, loaded everything into a truck while he watched from the window, and drove off with his entire career in the back of a van. He tried to film it for social media, probably thinking he could spin it as some kind of system is against me narrative, but people just roasted him in the comments for being a deadbeat who couldn't pay his bills. Lily's situation might have been the most poetic, though. She'd been so convinced that cryptocurrency was her ticket to financial freedom, spending hours every day watching YouTube videos about blockchain and following Twitter accounts with names like Crypto King and Moonlumbo, convinced that she was just one good investment away from never having to work again. She'd put whatever money she had, which wasn't much, considering she'd never held a job for more than 3 months, into various coins with increasingly ridiculous names. Moondoge, Safe Elon Mars, Baby Floki Shib, all the greatest hits of obvious scams and pump-and-dump schemes. The market crashed about 2 weeks after our trial. Not the whole market, just the specific garbage tier meme coins that people like Lily thought were going to make them rich. Her portfolio went from maybe $2,000 to about $63 overnight. She posted this long, rambling rant on Twitter about how crypto was supposed to be the future and how the system was rigged against regular people, completely missing the irony that she'd tried to rig a different system against her own brother-in-law like a week earlier. But my favorite part of her downfall was the YouTube channel. She decided, in her infinite wisdom, that she was going to become a crypto influencer and start a YouTube channel teaching people about digital currency. She bought a ring light, set up a green screen in her bedroom, and filmed this elaborate introduction video where she talked about her journey in crypto and how she was going to help people achieve financial freedom. She edited the whole thing, added music, created a thumbnail with her face and the words Crypto Queen in aggressive font, and uploaded it with all the confidence of someone who'd never experienced consequences before. The video got exactly 47 views, 32 of which were probably her refreshing the page, and the comment section was absolutely brutal. People found out who she was, connected her to the court case, and descended on her channel like a swarm of very articulate bees. Every comment was some variation of, "Aren't you the girl who tried to scam your sister's husband?" Or, "Maybe focus on getting a real job before teaching people about money." Or my personal favorite, "The only thing you should be influencing is a decision to stay off the internet." She deleted the video after 3 days, but of course, someone had downloaded it and re-uploaded it to a cringe compilation channel, where it got about 15,000 views and became a minor meme in certain corners of the internet. She tried to copyright strike it, but apparently you can't copyright strike videos that are considered commentary or criticism, so it just stayed up there, a permanent monument to bad decisions and worse financial advice. The real poetic justice? She forgot to pay her internet bill. For someone who spent her entire life online, who'd built her whole identity around being digitally connected and crypto-savvy, she somehow couldn't manage to pay the $60 monthly fee for Wi-Fi. Her service got shut off, and she had to go to coffee shops to use their internet, where she'd sit for hours nursing a single small coffee while the staff gave her increasingly annoyed looks. About a month after the divorce was finalized, I found myself sitting in a therapist's office that looked like it had been decorated by someone who really wanted you to feel calm. Soft beige walls, paintings of peaceful landscapes that probably came from HomeGoods. One of those tabletop Zen gardens with the tiny rake that nobody actually uses, and a diffuser pumping out lavender essential oils like it was trying to aromatherapy me into a coma. The chairs were that perfect level of comfortable where you could sit for an hour without your back hurting, but not so comfortable that you'd fall asleep, which I'm pretty sure was intentional design. Dr. Sandra Brooks sat across from me with a notepad and the kind of patient expression that suggested she'd heard everything at least twice and nothing surprised her anymore. She was in her 50s, with gray hair. She didn't bother dyeing, and glasses that sat on a beaded chain around her neck like a librarian from a movie. She had the patience of a saint and the bullshit detector of a seasoned detective, which was apparently exactly what I needed. "So," she said, after I'd spent the first 15 minutes of our session giving her the highlight reel of my marriage and divorce, "how are you feeling about all of this?" I leaned back in my chair, considered lying and saying something emotionally mature like, "I'm processing," or "I'm on a journey of healing," but decided that if I was paying $200 an hour for therapy, I might as well be honest. I feel like I just escaped from a cult, except the cult was my marriage and the doctrine was give us all your money. She smiled, just a little. That's actually a pretty accurate analogy. Financial abuse is a real thing, and it sounds like you experienced it alongside emotional manipulation. Is it still abuse if I kind of let it happen? I asked, which was the question that had been bothering me late at night when I couldn't sleep. Like, I saw the red flags. I knew something was wrong, but I just kept going along with it because I didn't want to be the bad guy or cause drama or admit that I'd made a mistake. That's not letting it happen, Dr. Brooks said firmly. That's being conditioned over time to normalize behavior that isn't normal. It's like the metaphor about boiling a frog. If you turn up the heat slowly enough, the frog doesn't realize it's being cooked until it's too late. Your wife and her family didn't start out asking you for $10,000. They built up to it gradually, testing your boundaries, seeing what you tolerate. So what you're saying is I'm a boiled frog. What I'm saying is you were in an abusive situation and you got out, which takes courage and self-awareness that a lot of people never develop. I sat with that for a moment. I make jokes about everything, I admitted. Like, even when I'm talking about serious stuff, I can't help but be sarcastic or funny about it. Is that bad? Am I deflecting? Dr. Brooks adjusted her glasses, gave me that look that therapists give when they're about to drop some wisdom that you're going to think about for weeks. You deflect pain with sarcasm, she said simply. It's a coping mechanism, not necessarily a bad one, as long as you're also actually processing the emotions underneath the jokes. Of course I deflect with sarcasm, I said. It's cheaper than drinking and more socially acceptable than screaming into a pillow. She laughed at that, a real genuine laugh that made her seem less like a therapist and more like a person. See, that's actually healthy. You're aware of what you're doing and why you're doing it. Humor is a valid way to process trauma. as long as it doesn't become the only way. We spent the next several sessions unpacking my marriage, my tendency to people please, my fear of confrontation that came from being raised to be polite above all else, and my habit of setting myself on fire to keep other people warm. Dr. Brooks had this way of asking questions that made me realize things I'd been deliberately not thinking about, like how I'd basically trained myself to prioritize everyone else's comfort over my own, or how I'd equated being a good person with being useful to others. "You're not a vending machine," she told me during one session. "You don't exist to dispense resources when people put in the right combination of guilt and obligation. You're a person with needs and boundaries, and enforcing those boundaries doesn't make you selfish. It makes you healthy." With her help, I started to forgive myself for staying too long, for ignoring the red flags, for believing that love meant sacrifice instead of partnership. I stopped blaming myself for marrying someone who saw potential dollar signs instead of an actual human being. I learned that being kind doesn't mean being a doormat, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away from people who only love what you can give them. And then, in what Dr. Brooks called a very positive redirect of your resources, I started the Miles Mentorship Program. It was a small scholarship fund for underprivileged students who wanted to learn tech skills and financial literacy, the kind of program I wish had existed when I was eating ramen and teaching myself to code from free YouTube tutorials. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The guy who got financially abused now teaching people how to manage money and avoid exploitation. "That's actually perfect," Dr. Brooks said when I told her about it. "You're taking your painful experience and transforming it into something that helps others." "That's like textbook healthy coping. Plus it's tax deductible," I added. "And there's the deflection," she said, smiling. "But yes, that too." 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Dad drove down from Jacksonville to visit me in Orlando. He'd been talking about making the trip for weeks, saying he wanted to see my apartment, check out the city, maybe catch a Magic game if we could get tickets. But I knew the real reason. He wanted to make sure I was actually okay. Not just, "I'm fine," okay, but genuinely, honestly, mentally stable okay. That's what good fathers do. They show up. He arrived on a Saturday morning in his old pickup truck, the same one he'd been driving since I was in high school, refusing to upgrade because she still runs fine and I'm not made of money. I watched him park from my balcony. This man who'd worked 70-hour weeks his entire adult life to keep a diner running and a kid fed, who'd never asked me for anything except to be happy and maybe call more often. The contrast between him and Melissa's family was so stark, it was almost funny. "Almost. Nice place," he said when I let him in, looking around my apartment with the kind of approval that comes from a father seeing his son finally comfortable. "You got yourself set up real good here." We spent the afternoon just talking, the way we used to when I was younger and hadn't yet learned that life was complicated. He told me about the diner, how business had picked up after the renovations, how the new espresso machine was a hit with the morning crowd, how he'd hired 2 new servers and was finally able to take Sundays off for the first time in 15 years. I told him about work, about the scholarship program, about therapy and Friday night tacos, and how I was learning to be a person again instead of just a paycheck with feelings. As evening rolled around, we grabbed a couple of beers from my fridge and headed out to the balcony. The Orlando skyline was doing its thing, all those lights starting to glow as the sun set, painting everything in shades of orange and purple that looked like someone had turned up the saturation on reality. We sat in the comfortable silence that only exists between people who actually know each other, not needing to fill every moment with conversation. "You know what I'm proud of?" Dad said finally, taking a sip of his beer and looking out at the city. "Not the money you make or the job title or any of that external stuff. I'm proud that you knew when to walk away. That takes strength that most people never develop. I should have walked away sooner." I admitted, something I'd been working on in therapy, this tendency to beat myself up for not being perfect. "Maybe," he agreed. "But you walked away when it mattered. You didn't let them break you completely. You didn't let that situation define your whole life. You got out, you got help, and you turned it into something good with that scholarship program." He turned to look at me, his eyes serious. "Your mother would have been so proud of you. She always said you had a good heart. I'm glad you didn't let them ruin that." I felt my throat get tight. That pre-crying feeling that I'd been experiencing more often since starting therapy, learning that it was okay to actually feel things instead of deflecting with jokes. I miss her, I said quietly. I keep thinking about how she would have seen through Melissa immediately. Mom had that bullshit detector that could spot a fake person from a mile away. Dad laughed, a soft sound full of memory and love. She did. Remember when you were dating that girl in college? The one who kept forgetting her wallet whenever you went out? Your mother took one look at her and said, "That girl's about as genuine as a $3 bill." I should have listened, I said, smiling despite the emotion. You were young. Young people don't listen. That's part of the deal. You learn by making mistakes, and the important thing is that you actually learned. He raised his beer bottle. So here's to learning the hard way and coming out the other side. I clinked my bottle against his. To learning the hard way. We sat there as the sky darkened, watching the city come alive with lights, and I realized something that should have been obvious, but somehow wasn't until that exact moment. This was family. Not the people who shared my DNA and saw me as a resource. Not the people who only called when they needed something, but this. Sitting on a balcony with someone who actually gave a damn about my happiness, who'd driven 3 hours just to make sure I was okay, who'd never asked me for anything except to be the best version of myself. So, Dad said after a while, his tone shifting to that slightly mischievous one that meant he was about to say something he thought was clever. You learned anything from all this? Any wisdom you want to share with your old man? I thought about it, really thought about it. About Melissa and her siblings and the whole disaster that was my marriage. About the therapy sessions and the Friday night tacos and the scholarship program. About learning to set boundaries and recognize red flags and understand that love shouldn't cost everything you have. Yeah, I said finally, grinning. I learned that love is great and all, but credit card limits are greater. Dad laughed so hard he nearly spilled his beer. That full-body laugh that comes from genuine amusement and maybe a little relief that his son still had a sense of humor after everything. That's terrible, he wheezed. That's absolutely terrible advice. It's not advice, I corrected. It's a survival strategy. We laughed together, the sound carrying out over the balcony into the Orlando night. And I felt something settle in my chest that might have been peace, or might have been acceptance, or might have been just the simple satisfaction of knowing I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I looked around my apartment from my position on the balcony, taking inventory of my life. No shouting matches about money. No guilt trips disguised as family obligations. No emotional invoices showing up in my mailbox with payment due immediately. Just peace. Just quiet. Just the gentle hum of a life that finally belonged to me again. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. I pulled it out, looked at it for a second, and then declined the call without even checking who it was. Could have been Melissa. Could have been one of her siblings. Could have been a telemarketer trying to sell me car insurance. Didn't matter. I had boundaries now. Actual enforced boundaries. And one of those boundaries was that unknown numbers went straight to voicemail where they belonged. Everything okay? Dad asked. Yeah, I said, putting my phone face down on the table. Everything's perfect. And I meant it. For the first time in what felt like forever, I actually meant it. The divorce was final, the restraining order was in place, and Melissa and her family were firmly in my rearview mirror where they belonged. I had friends who actually cared about me, a father who'd always had my back, a career that fulfilled me, and a bank account that was mine and only mine. I finally understood what I should have known from the beginning. Family isn't defined by who shares your blood or your last name or your legal documents. Family isn't the people who drain your bank account while calling it love. Family is the people who show up when you need them, who celebrate your success without treating it as their own personal jackpot, who ask how you're doing and actually want to hear the answer. Family is my dad driving 3 hours just to sit on a balcony and drink beer with me. Family is Rico, Janet, and Tom showing up every Friday with tacos and terrible relationship stories. Family is Dr. Brooks teaching me that humor and healing aren't mutually exclusive. Family is the students in my scholarship program who send me updates about their internships and job offers, grateful for a chance they might not have gotten otherwise. And as for Melissa and her siblings, those people who treated my success like it was their birthright and my kindness like it was weakness, well, let's just say they finally learned about compound interest, the hard way. Not financial compound interest, but the karmic kind, where bad decisions and worse behavior accumulate over time until the debt comes due all at once. I heard through the grapevine that Melissa had moved back in with her parents, working retail at a mall and complaining on social media about how hard life was. Troy was apparently working at a car wash, which was deeply ironic considering he'd wanted me to buy him a car. Becca had given up on her fashion empire and was selling insurance, which seemed fitting somehow. And Lily had finally gotten a real job, working customer service at a call center, dealing with angry people all day, which I chose to believe was the universe's way of teaching her empathy. I didn't take any pleasure in their struggles. Okay, maybe a little pleasure, but not in a vindictive way. More in a natural consequences are a hell of a teacher way. They'd built their lives on the assumption that someone else would always be there to catch them, to fund their dreams, to subsidize their choices. And when that someone finally said no, they had to figure out how to actually stand on their own 2 feet. You're smiling, Dad observed. What are you thinking about? Just that I'm glad I'm here, I said honestly. On this balcony, in this apartment, in this life. With you. Dad reached over and squeezed my shoulder, the kind of gesture that says more than words ever could. Me too, son. Me too. We sat there as the stars started appearing, as the city settled into its nighttime rhythm, as the world kept spinning the way it always does regardless of human drama. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Content. Not ecstatically happy, not chasing some impossible ideal of perfection, just genuinely, deeply content with who I was and where I was and the choices that had led me here. Tomorrow I'd go back to work. Next Friday, I'd eat tacos with my friends. Next month, I'd meet with the scholarship recipients and hear about their progress. But tonight, right now, in this moment, I was exactly where I needed to be. On a balcony with my father, drinking beer, watching the skyline glow, and finally understanding that the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living well. It's choosing peace. It's building a life so good that the people who try to exploit you become nothing more than a funny story you tell at parties, a cautionary tale about red flags and boundaries, a reminder that sometimes the family you need isn't the one you're born with, but the one you choose. And I chose pretty damn well. My wife begged me not to come her office party. My friends are honestly embarrassed for me when I bring you around. She said over sushi. I paid for my half and never spoke to her again. Now her friends watch me thrive while she spirals. If there's one thing I've learned in my 29 years of stumbling through this circus we call life, it's this absolute gem of wisdom. When your wife begs you not to show up somewhere, it's not because she's planning some elaborate surprise party with sparklers and a cake shaped like your face. No. It's because she's actually embarrassed of you, and she's doing you the courtesy of spelling it out in the most soul-crushing way possible while you're literally sitting across from her at dinner. Her name was Sabrina, my wife of 3 gloriously delusional years, corporate marketing queen who could sell ice to penguins, self-proclaimed socialite who thought having 5,000 Instagram followers made her basically Beyoncé, and part-time humility assassin who could destroy your self-esteem with the precision of a surgeon and the empathy of a parking meter. She had this way of making you feel like you'd won the lottery and simultaneously like you were the janitor cleaning up after the real winners. It was a special talent, really, one that should probably be studied by psychologists and maybe weaponized by the military. Her office was throwing this big networking gala. You know, the kind of event where people pretend to love each other while silently competing for who has the bigger LinkedIn following, the shinier business card, or the most obnoxiously pretentious job title. Chief Synergy Officer, or whatever the hell that means. These were the kinds of gatherings where everyone sipped wine that cost more than my car payment and talked about disrupting industries, when really they just meant making an app that does what another app already does, but with a different color scheme. I was actually ready to go, and I mean genuinely excited in that puppy dog husband way that makes you cringe when you look back on it. I had my suit ironed to perfection, not a wrinkle in sight. Shoes polished so well I could see my increasingly questionable life choices reflected in them, and my heart stupidly, tragically loyal like some golden retriever who keeps bringing the ball back even after you've thrown it into traffic. I thought, hey, this is what supportive husbands do. They show up. They smile. They make small talk about quarterly projections and pretend to understand what synergy actually means. But then she grabbed my arm, right there in our bedroom as I was adjusting my tie, and she looked at me with those perfectly mascaraed eyes and whispered in that tone that somehow managed to be both sweet and absolutely devastating. Please, Noah, don't come. My friends are honestly embarrassed for me when I bring you around. Embarrassed. That was the word she chose. Not, they don't get your humor, or you're too good for them, or literally anything that wouldn't make me feel like I was a lost intern who accidentally wandered into a rich people convention wearing a name tag that said, "Hi, I'm poor and boring." Just straight up embarrassed. Like I was her dirty little secret, except instead of being scandalous and exciting, I was just disappointing. A participation trophy she had to display but really wanted to shove in a closet. I stood there for a moment, tie half nodded, brain doing that thing where it tries to process information that doesn't quite compute, like when you're watching a plot twist in a movie, but it's your actual life, and there's no rewind button. I wanted to say something clever, something cutting, something that would make her realize what an absolutely unhinged thing that was to say to your husband. But instead, I just felt this weird calmness wash over me. The kind of calm you get when you finally understand something you've been denying for way too long. So I did what any self-respecting husband would do in that moment. I nodded calmly, my face probably looking like I was accepting a package delivery rather than having my marriage implode in real time. I finished getting dressed. We drove to her favorite sushi restaurant in complete silence, the kind of silence where you can hear every thought screaming in your head. We sat down at one of those minimalist tables that cost more than most people's furniture, ordered our usual rolls, and made the kind of painful small talk that people make when they both know something fundamental has shattered, but they're still pretending everything's fine. When the bill came, I did something I'd never done in our entire relationship. I paid for exactly my half. Not the whole thing like I usually did because I was the man or whatever outdated notion I'd been operating under. Not even a penny more. I calculated my portion down to the California roll, left my cash on the table with the precision of an accountant settling a business transaction, and made a mental vow right then and there to never speak to her again unless absolutely legally necessary. She looked confused, actually had the audacity to look confused, like this was somehow surprising behavior from the man she'd just told her friends were embarrassed by. "Noah," she said, her voice doing that little upturned thing that used to make me melt, but now just made me tired. I smiled. Not a real smile, but that polite customer service smile you give to people you're done with, and said, "Thanks for dinner, Sabrina. I think I'll skip the gala. Wouldn't want to embarrass you." The drive home was the longest 20 minutes of my life, and when I walked into our apartment, the one I'd been paying most of the rent for while she built her brand, I realized something profound and incredibly obvious that I should have figured out approximately 3 years earlier. I had been married to someone who saw me as an accessory that didn't match her outfit anymore. Not a partner, not a teammate, just a boring, stable, embarrassing accessory that she'd outgrown now that she had fancy work friends and networking galas. I sat on our couch, the one we'd picked out together during happier times when I still thought we meant something, and I didn't cry or throw things or do any of the dramatic stuff you see in movies. I just sat there feeling this weird mixture of relief and sadness, like I'd finally been given permission to admit what I'd known deep down for months. This marriage was a scam, and I'd been the Mark. The loyal, stable, boring Mark who paid the bills and ironed his suit, and thought that's what love looked like. My phone buzzed with a text from her. "You're being really immature about this." I stared at it for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, composing and deleting a dozen responses that ranged from eloquent to profane. But finally, I just turned off my phone, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and toasted to myself in the empty apartment. "Here's to stability," I said out loud to nobody. May it bore someone else to death. That night, lying in bed alone while she was presumably at her gala impressing all her friends with my convenient absence, I made a decision. Not a dramatic one, not some revenge plot or grand gesture. Just a simple decision to start giving the same energy I'd been giving to propping up Sabrina's life to actually building my own. To stop being embarrassed of being stable and start being proud of being real. Because here's what Sabrina and her champagne-sipping, business card collecting friends didn't understand. Stability isn't boring. Stability is what you build a life on. And while they were all out there chasing the next big thing, the next impressive title, the next person to make them look good at parties, I was going to chase something way more radical. I was going to chase being genuinely happy with someone who actually wanted me there. But first, I needed to figure out how to unfuck my life. And that, as it turns out, would be the easiest part. Let's rewind the tape here, back to a time when I had significantly more hair, significantly less wisdom, and the kind of optimism that only exists in 23-year-old guys who think they've figured out life because they landed an entry-level IT job with dental benefits. This is the part of the story where I explain how I went from a reasonably intelligent college graduate to a guy who willingly signed up to be someone's emotional support ATM for 3 years. Buckle up, because this origin story is less superhero and more cautionary tale that should be played in high schools as a warning. Sabrina and I met in college, specifically in one of those massive lecture halls where 200 students pretend to take notes while actually online shopping or playing phone games. She was sitting 3 rows ahead of me in Marketing 301, which I was only taking because I needed an elective and it fit perfectly between my actually useful computer science classes. She was all charm and charisma, wielding eyeliner like war paint and ambition like a weapon she was just learning to use. I was an IT consultant in training who genuinely thought networking meant fixing someone's Wi-Fi router and maybe eating pizza in the server room if you were lucky. Our first real conversation happened after she dropped her phone and the screen absolutely shattered into a spider web of regret and AppleCare claims. I helped her back up her photos to the cloud, which apparently made me her personal tech savior and, in her words, literally the sweetest guy I've ever met. Looking back, the bar was so low it was basically a tripping hazard, but at the time I felt like I'd won the lottery. Here was this gorgeous, confident woman who laughed at my terrible jokes and said she loved that I was so grounded and real, not like these other fake college guys. I didn't realize that grounded was code for convenient placeholder boyfriend who won't interfere with my influencer fantasies. I thought grounded was a compliment, like being called solid or dependable. Turns out, in Sabrina's personal dictionary, grounded meant about as exciting as beige wallpaper in a dentist's waiting room, useful for filling space, but not something you'd ever actually brag about. We dated through senior year, and honestly, it was pretty great at first. She was funny, driven, always had some new project or idea she was working on. I was supportive, showed up to her presentations, hyped up her Instagram posts before I even understood what engagement rates were. When graduation hit, we moved in together in this cramped apartment that cost way too much because it was in the trendy part of town, which really just meant there was a coffee shop that charged $8 for oat milk lattes and a vintage store that sold used flannel for the price of a car payment. That's when things started getting interesting. And by interesting, I mean I should have seen the red flags, but I was too busy being in love and also colorblind to warning signs. Sabrina was working at a boutique marketing agency, one of those places with exposed brick and motivational quotes on the walls like "hustle beats talent" and "good vibes only," which is corporate speak for "we pay you in experience" and LaCroix. Then she lost her job. Budget cuts, they said, but really it was because she spent more time curating her personal brand than actually working on client campaigns. She came home crying, mascara running, the whole devastating scene, and I did what any supportive boyfriend turned fiancé would do. I told her it was going to be okay, that we'd figure it out together, that this was just a minor setback in her obviously brilliant career trajectory. What I meant was, take a week to feel your feelings, update your resume, and start applying to new positions. What she heard was, finance my entire lifestyle indefinitely while I discover myself. I paid her rent, and I mean all of it, not just my half. I paid for groceries, utilities, that ridiculously expensive oat milk she insisted was the only kind that didn't upset her stomach. I bought her online courses, those $200 webinars about personal branding and social media growth hacking that were basically just someone reading a blog post at you for 6 hours. I even turned down a promotion that would have moved us across the country, a genuine career-changing opportunity that would have doubled my salary and put me on an actual path to senior management. Why did I turn it down? Because she grabbed my hands, looked at me with those big, sincere eyes that I now realize were probably calculating her next move, and said, "Babe, I need you here to build my brand. I'm so close to breaking through. If you leave now, everything I've worked for falls apart. Don't you believe in us? Build her brand." I should have known right then that I was investing in a pyramid scheme called Sabrina's Ego Incorporated, where I was the only investor, and she was somehow both the CEO and the product. But no, I bought into it completely, told my boss I couldn't take the position, and stayed put in our expensive, trendy apartment while she posted aesthetic photos on Instagram about grinding and manifesting abundance, while I literally paid for the avocado toast she photographed. Months went by, and her brand building looked a lot like sleeping until noon, spending 3 hours getting the lighting right for a single photo of her morning coffee, and occasionally attending networking events where she collected business cards like Pokemon cards, but never actually followed up with anyone. Meanwhile, I was working 50-hour weeks, coming home exhausted, and still somehow finding energy to be supportive and encouraging because that's what partners do, right? Wrong. That's what suckers do. Partners support each other. What I was doing was enabling someone who had confused ambition with entitlement and somehow convinced me that my stability was the foundation she needed to build her empire on. Except she wasn't building anything except a really impressive collection of ring lights and a following of bots she definitely paid for, but swore were organic. I remember one night, about a year into this arrangement, I was doing our taxes and realized I'd paid for literally everything for 12 straight months. Every single expense. Her contribution to our household was her presence and occasional motivational speeches about how we were both going to make it big, just in different ways. She was going to be a marketing influencer, and I was going to be, well, she never really finished that sentence because my role was already defined, the wallet. But here's the thing about being in deep, about being invested emotionally and financially, and having built your entire life around someone. You don't just wake up one day and see clearly. It's gradual, like those optical illusions where you can see either a vase or two faces, and once someone points out what you're supposed to see, you can't unsee it. Except nobody was pointing it out to me because all my friends had slowly drifted away, probably tired of hearing me make excuses for why Sabrina couldn't contribute to dinner or why we couldn't go on that trip we planned because she needed new equipment for her content creation. I was isolated, financially drained, and convinced that this was just what love looked like when you were with someone ambitious and special. That sacrifice was romantic. That struggle was just part of the journey. That eventually it would all pay off and we'd laugh about these lean years from our future mansion that her influencer empire would buy. Spoiler alert, the only thing that paid off was my student loan interest because I was too busy funding someone else's fantasy to actually invest in my own future. I should have seen it coming, should have recognized that someone who needs you to stay small so they can feel big isn't building you up, they're standing on your shoulders and calling it success. But love makes you stupid, and hope makes you stubborn, and the combination makes you the perfect mark for someone who's more interested in what you can do for them than who you actually are. I thought I was being a supportive partner. Turns out, I was just being used, and I'd paid premium price for the privilege. The fairy tale I thought we were living was actually a scam, and I was the only one who didn't realize I was being conned. But hey, at least I learned a valuable lesson. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time, not 3 years and several $1,000s later when they finally say it out loud at a sushi restaurant. At first, the digs were subtle, the kind of comments that you could almost convince yourself were helpful suggestions from a caring partner who just wanted you to be your best self. You know, the kind of feedback that comes wrapped in a smile and delivered with just enough sweetness that you can't quite tell if you're being insulted or improved. It's like death by 1,000 paper cuts, except the paper is made of passive-aggressive concern and the cuts are aimed directly at your self-esteem. It started with appearance, because of course it did. You should dress sharper, she'd say while scrolling through Instagram photos of her friends' husbands who apparently all shopped exclusively at stores where a single shirt cost more than my entire wardrobe. She'd show me pictures of guys in perfectly tailored suits, designer watches catching the light just right, pocket squares folded with the precision of origami masters. See how put together Marcus looks? That's the kind of energy you should be bringing. Energy. She was talking about clothes like they were a personality trait, like wearing a $2,000 suit would somehow transform me from an IT consultant into whatever fantasy version of a husband she'd cooked up in her head. I wanted to point out that Marcus worked in finance and probably spent more on dry cleaning than I spent on food, but that would have been defensive, which was another thing I apparently needed to work on. Then came the ambition comments, my personal favorite category of constructive criticism. My friends' husbands are all so ambitious, she'd sigh. Usually while we were doing something completely normal, like watching TV or eating dinner. Not even fancy dinner, just regular Tuesday night pasta, and she'd just dropped that little grenade into the conversation like she was commenting on the weather. Trevor just got promoted to VP. Diane's husband Marcus started his own consulting firm. Even Jess's boyfriend is launching some crypto thing. Ah yes, because nothing says true love like constantly comparing your partner to other people's highlight reels. I'd sit there, fork halfway to my mouth, wondering what the appropriate response was to being told I wasn't ambitious enough. Should I apologize for having a stable job with benefits? Should I start a crypto scam just to keep up with the Joneses? Or in this case, the Marcuses and Trevors of Sabrina's aspirational friend group? Maybe try being more confident, she suggested one morning, as if confidence was something you could just download like an app update. This gem came after I'd apparently embarrassed her at some gallery opening by admitting I didn't understand modern art. Excuse me for not pretending that 3 red lines on a white canvas was a profound statement about the human condition. I thought honesty was a virtue, but apparently in Sabrina's world, faking sophistication was more important than being genuine. Noah works in IT, Sabrina would say when someone inevitably asked what I did. And I swear she said it the same way you'd say Noah collects bottle caps or Noah enjoys watching paint dry. No elaboration, no mention that I actually had a pretty solid position at a reputable company, just IT delivered with the enthusiasm of someone reading a phone book. Meanwhile, Trevor the VP would launch into some story about closing a major deal, complete with hand gestures and dramatic pauses, and everyone would lean in like he was revealing the secrets of the universe instead of just describing a normal work thing that he'd inflated into an epic saga. Marcus would chime in about his consulting firm's latest client, name-dropping companies like he was collecting Pokemon cards. And I'd just sit there, eating my overpriced eggs, wondering what I was supposed to contribute to this conversation. The worst part wasn't even the conversations themselves, it was the looks. Her friends would glance at me with this mixture of pity and curiosity, like I was an interesting specimen they were studying. "How's work going, Noah?" they'd ask, but not in a way that suggested they actually cared about the answer. It was more like they were giving me a chance to say something impressive, and when I'd give a normal response about projects and deadlines, I could literally see their interest die in real time. They'd laugh too loudly at each other's jokes. The kind of performative laughter that's more about showing you're in on it than actually finding something funny. They'd sip their $18 cocktails, these elaborate drinks with names like the Bourgeois Mule or Cucumber Clarity, and discuss their next vacation like they were planning a diplomatic mission. We're thinking Tulum, but it's gotten so commercial. Maybe Croatia? Meanwhile, I just wanted fries, regular fries, not truffle fries or sweet potato fries with aioli. Just normal fries that didn't cost more than a full meal anywhere else. Sabrina would touch my arm occasionally. These little performative gestures of affection that were more about showing her friends she had a husband than actually connecting with me. I was a prop in her life, the stable, boring husband who showed up and smiled and was supposed to be grateful for the privilege of sitting at the cool kids' table, even though the cool kids clearly wished I'd sit somewhere else. Her friends looked at me like I was the unpaid intern of her marriage. Someone who was there out of necessity rather than choice. Someone who hadn't quite earned his place, but was being tolerated anyway. And maybe that's exactly what I was, because I kept showing up, kept trying to fit in, kept hoping that eventually I'd figure out the secret code that would make me acceptable to these people who valued appearance over authenticity and status over substance. I should have known then that this wasn't going to work, that you can't build a real relationship with someone who's embarrassed by reality and only interested in the fantasy version of life she'd constructed in her head. But I was still trying, still hoping, still believing that if I just improved enough, changed enough, became impressive enough, everything would click into place and she'd finally see me the way I saw her. Spoiler, that's not how any of this works. Then came the night that would go down in my personal history as the moment I finally grew a backbone and realized that love shouldn't require you to shrink yourself into something unrecognizable just to fit into someone else's aspirational Pinterest board of a life. It was a Thursday, which feels important somehow, like the universe chose the most boring weekday possible to deliver my wake-up call. Not a dramatic Saturday or a contemplative Sunday, just regular old Thursday, the day nobody ever writes songs about. She picked a sushi restaurant, and not just any sushi restaurant, But one of those places so fancy it looked like a jewelry store had a baby with a fish tank and then hired a minimalist architect to design the nursery. Everything was black marble and soft lighting, with those private booths that cost extra and probably came with a complimentary lecture on the proper way to appreciate raw fish. The kind of place where the menu didn't have prices because if you had to ask, you clearly didn't belong there. Except they did have prices, and they were absolutely astronomical. We sat down in one of those booths, surrounded by couples who all looked like they were on first dates funded by venture capital. Everyone dressed like they'd just come from closing million-dollar deals, or at least wanted everyone to think they had. The waiter brought us hot towels with actual tongs, like our hands were too precious to touch regular napkins, and presented us with a menu that read like a novel written entirely in Japanese with English subtitles that didn't really help. Sabrina ordered for both of us without asking, which she'd started doing recently as part of her whole sophisticated woman who knows what she wants persona. She rattled off a list of rolls and sashimi that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, smiling at the waiter like she did this every day, like dropping $200 on dinner was just a casual Thursday activity for people like us. Except there was no us in that financial reality. There was just me, quietly calculating how many overtime hours this meal was going to cost. Halfway through dinner, right after the waiter brought out some elaborate dish that looked more like modern art than food, she sighed. It was one of those heavy sighs, the kind that carries the weight of a conversation she'd been rehearsing in her head, probably while I was at work actually earning the money to pay for this theatrical production of a breakup. She fiddled with her chopsticks, doing this thing where she'd pick them up and put them down, pick them up and put them down, like she was building up courage or maybe just adding dramatic pause for effect. Noah, she started, and I knew immediately that nothing good ever follows your name said like that, with that particular tone of resignation mixed with pity. My friends are honestly embarrassed for me when I bring you around. You're not impressive. I blinked, just blinked, sitting there with a piece of expensive tuna halfway to my mouth, my brain trying to process what I'd just heard. She said it so casually, like she was ordering miso soup or commenting on the weather. Just dropped this nuclear bomb into the middle of our fancy sushi dinner like it was a normal thing to say to your husband. Not impressive. Those were the words she chose, like I was a used car she was trying to return or a restaurant that didn't live up to its Yelp reviews. For a second, I just sat there in silence, watching her avoid eye contact while pretending to be very interested in the presentation of her sashimi. Part of me wanted to laugh because this was so absurd it felt like a scene from a bad movie. The kind where you yell at the screen telling the main character to just leave. But I was the main character, and leaving felt a lot harder when you were the one actually sitting in the expensive booth with the judgmental lighting. Not impressive how? I finally asked, setting down my chopsticks very carefully because I didn't trust myself not to do something dramatic with them. Because I don't rent yachts or talk about crypto at brunch. Because I have a stable job instead of pretending to disrupt industries while actually just making PowerPoints? What exactly is the impressive criteria I'm failing here, Sabrina? She did this little shrug, this tiny movement of her shoulders that somehow conveyed both indifference and disdain in a single gesture. It was impressive, really, in an absolutely devastating way. You're nice, she said, like nice was a disease, like being a decent human being was somehow a character flaw. But stability is boring, Noah. My friends' husbands are doing things, building things, making things happen. You just exist. You go to work, come home, watch TV. Where's the ambition? Where's the excitement? And there it was, the real issue laid bare between us like the overpriced fish on our plates. I wasn't a person to her anymore. I was a reflection, and apparently I wasn't reflecting the right image. I was supposed to be her trophy, her impressive husband she could show off at networking events and brunches. But instead I was just a regular guy with a regular job who thought marriage was about partnership and love rather than social climbing and Instagram aesthetics. Stability is boring, I repeated, letting those words sink in, tasting them like the wasabi I'd accidentally eaten too much of earlier. You know what else stability did, Sabrina? Paid your rent for 8 months when you lost your job. Bought you those online courses you never finished. Funded your entire brand-building adventure that somehow never actually built anything except your follower count, which I'm pretty sure is mostly bots anyway. Her face went red, That particular shade of angry embarrassment that people get when you call out their bullshit in a public place where they can't fully lose it without causing a scene. That's not fair, she hissed, her voice low but sharp. I was investing in my future. Our future. Your future, I corrected, feeling something shift inside me, like a locked door finally clicking open. I was never part of the future you were building, Sabrina. I was just the foundation you were planning to abandon once you got high enough to forget where you started. She opened her mouth to argue, probably had some rehearsed response about how I was being unfair or not understanding her vision, but I held up my hand. I was done, so completely done that I could feel it in my bones. This crystalline clarity that comes when you finally stop lying to yourself about what's really happening. You're right, I said, and I watched her face shift, probably thinking I was about to apologize or back down like I always did. Stability is boring, especially when it's paying for someone else's delusions. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to pay for my half of this incredibly overpriced fish, and then I'm going to leave. Not just this restaurant, Sabrina. All of it. I pulled out my wallet, took out my credit card, and did the mental math for exactly half the bill. Every California roll, every piece of sashimi, every fancy drink she'd ordered, I calculated my portion down to the penny. It felt petty and perfect, this small act of financial independence after years of just paying for everything without question. What are you doing? She asked, watching me count out bills with what looked like genuine confusion, like the concept of splitting a check was completely foreign to her. Maybe it was. Maybe in all her fancy brunches with all her impressive friends, nobody had ever made her pay for her own shit. I'm paying for my half, I said calmly, placing the exact amount on the table with the kind of precision I usually reserved for coding. You want it impressive? Here's something impressive. Me finally respecting myself enough to stop funding someone who doesn't respect me. I stood up, straightened my boring stable jacket, and smiled at her. Not a mean smile, not an angry smile, just a tired smile from someone who'd finally figured out the game was rigged. You know what else is impressive, Sabrina? Having the self-awareness to know when you're being used. Thanks for dinner. Well, thanks for your half of dinner. I paid for mine. She started to say something, probably some last-ditch attempt to either guilt me or rage at me, but I was already walking away, weaving through the tables of impressive couples spending impressive amounts of money to impress each other. The waiter looked confused as I passed, probably wondering if he should stop me, but I just gave him a nod and kept moving. Outside, the night air hit me like a splash of cold water, shocking and clarifying all at once. I stood there on the sidewalk, watching through the window as Sabrina sat alone in that expensive booth, probably calculating how she was going to explain this to her friends, how she was going to spin this into a story where she was the victim and I was the villain. But I didn't care anymore. For the first time in 3 years, I genuinely didn't care what she thought, what her friends thought, what any of them thought about me. I just walked away from my marriage in the middle of the fanciest sushi restaurant I'd ever been to, paid exactly my fair share, and felt absolutely zero regret. I pulled out my phone, called an Uber, and waited under the streetlight, feeling lighter than I had in months. The driver pulled up, asked me how my night was going, and I laughed, actually laughed out loud. It's going great, I told him honestly. I just paid for the most expensive half a sushi dinner of my life, and it was worth every penny. He looked at me like I was crazy, which was fair, but I didn't care. I'd just bought my freedom with some overpriced tuna and a side of self-respect, and honestly, best investment I'd ever made. Way better than funding someone else's fantasy life. Way better than being the stable, boring foundation for someone else's impressive future. As we drove away, I didn't look back at the restaurant. I just looked forward, at the road ahead, at the life I was about to reclaim. Calm. No scene. Just quiet dignity and one very generous tip for the waiter who'd had to witness that whole mess. Because that's the thing about actually having class. It's not about expensive restaurants or impressive titles or networking events. It's about knowing your worth and not accepting anything less. And my worth? Definitely more than being someone's embarrassing secret. Heartbreak sucks, and anyone who tells you otherwise is either lying or has never actually had their heart broken by someone they genuinely loved, or at least thought they loved before realizing they were actually just in love with the idea of being loved. It's a special kind of pain, the kind that makes you understand why people write terrible poetry and listen to sad music at 3 in the morning while eating ice cream directly from the container like some kind of cliché movie character. Except this was my life, not a movie, and the ice cream was store brand because I was suddenly paying all my bills alone and premium Ben & Jerry's felt like an unnecessary luxury. For exactly 72 hours, I wallowed. That's 3 full business days of operating at maybe 30% capacity, going through the motions of being a functional human while internally feeling like someone had taken a blender to my emotions and hit the frappe button. I spent those first 3 days alternating between sad playlists that Spotify had apparently been curating specifically for this exact moment in my life, whiskey that tasted like bad decisions and worse memories, and Googling things like signs your wife is secretly awful at 2 in the morning like some kind of investigative journalist discovering evidence that was painfully obvious to literally everyone except me. The search results were not encouraging. Apparently, all the signs had been there from the beginning. The constant criticism disguised as helpful suggestions, the social embarrassment, the financial imbalance, the way she treated me more like an accessory than a partner. Reddit was full of people telling stories remarkably similar to mine, and the comments were all saying the same thing. Dude, she was using you. Thanks, Reddit. Really appreciate the confirmation that I'd wasted 3 years of my life and a significant portion of my savings on someone who saw me as a stepping stone. I called in sick to work on Friday, which I never did because I was that guy, the reliable one who showed up even with a cold. But this wasn't a cold. This was my entire life imploding, and I figured I'd earned one mental health day to sit on my couch in sweatpants and question every decision I'd made since college. My boss was surprisingly understanding, probably because I'd never asked for anything before, and told me to take care of myself. I wanted to tell him that taking care of myself would involve time travel and a redo of the past 3 years, but instead I just said thanks and hung up. Saturday was worse because it was the weekend, and weekends were when Sabrina and I used to do things together, or more accurately, when I used to tag along to her things and try not to embarrass her. I found myself automatically thinking about what brunch spot we'd go to before remembering that I was now officially disinvited from her social calendar permanently. The apartment felt too quiet, too empty, filled with all this stuff that we'd bought together but that I'd paid for. Every piece of furniture was a reminder, every picture on the wall a lie I'd been telling myself about what we were. Sunday night, something clicked. I was lying on the couch, halfway through my 3rd sad movie marathon, when I realized something profound and kind of obvious. I'd spent the last 72 hours mourning a relationship that had been dead for months, maybe even years. I wasn't actually sad about losing Sabrina. I was sad about losing the version of Sabrina I'd created in my head, the one who actually loved me and wanted to build a life together instead of just using me as a financial and emotional crutch while she tried to become Instagram famous. The real Sabrina, the one who told me her friends were embarrassed by me, the one who took my money and gave back criticism, the one who valued appearance over authenticity? I didn't want her back. I wanted an apology, sure, and maybe some acknowledgement that she'd treated me like garbage, but I didn't want to go back to that life where I was constantly trying to be impressive enough for someone who would never be impressed by anything real. So Monday morning, I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I put myself first. I woke up early, made myself an actual breakfast instead of grabbing whatever was quick, and sent an email to my boss asking about that promotion opportunity. Turns out, there was still an opening on the digital transformation team. A different position than the one I'd turned down, but similar trajectory, similar pay increase, similar opportunity to actually advance my career instead of keeping it on hold for someone else's dreams. Then I did something even more radical. I joined a gym. Not one of those fancy boutique fitness studios where Sabrina and her friends want to take mirror selfies between half-hearted yoga poses, but a real gym, the kind with actual weights, and people who grunted and sweated and didn't care if their workout clothes matched. It was glorious and intimidating and smelled vaguely like rubber and determination. The first day, I could barely bench press the bar without feeling like my arms were going to fall off, which was humbling in the best possible way. Nobody there cared that I was weak or out of shape or going through a divorce. The guy who showed me how to use the machines just nodded and said, "Everyone starts somewhere, man. Keep showing up." It was the most genuine encouragement I'd received in years, and it came from a stranger who probably forgot about me 30 seconds after our conversation ended. I kept showing up. Every morning before work, I'd drag myself to the gym, put in the work, and slowly, incrementally, started to feel like I was building something. Not just muscle, though that was happening too in a very slow and painful way, but self-respect. Every rep was proof that I could commit to something for myself, not for someone else's approval. Every morning I showed up was a middle finger to the version of me that had let someone else dictate my worth. Turns out, dumbbells don't gaslight you. They don't tell you you're not ambitious enough or that you need to be more impressive. They just sit there, waiting for you to pick them up, and when you do, they make you stronger. It was refreshingly straightforward in a way that relationships apparently weren't. Within months, I started seeing real changes. Not just physically, though I definitely developed some actual muscle definition that made buying new shirts necessary and kind of exciting. But mentally, emotionally, I was different. I slept better because I wasn't lying awake wondering why I wasn't good enough. I felt better because I was putting actual effort into taking care of myself instead of taking care of someone who didn't appreciate it. And honestly, I smelled richer, which sounds weird but is true. Confidence has a scent, and it's not expensive cologne. It's just the smell of someone who knows their worth. My boss called me into his office about 2 months after the sushi incident, and I genuinely thought I was in trouble for something because old habits die hard, and I was still operating under the assumption that authority figures were disappointed in me. Instead, he closed the door, sat down, and said, "Noah, we want you leading the new digital transformation team. The position comes with a significant raise, better benefits, and honestly, we should have promoted you a year ago." I sat there, trying to process this information, trying not to think about how a year ago I'd turned down a similar opportunity because Sabrina needed me to stay put while she built her brand. "I'd love to," I said, and meant it completely. "Can we rename it to Petty Revenge Department?" He laughed, thought I was joking, and I didn't correct him. But in my head, I was absolutely keeping that title. Every success from here on out was petty revenge against everyone who'd made me feel small, starting with myself for allowing it. The promotion meant more money, which meant I could finally start saving again instead of just covering expenses. It meant more responsibility, which turned out to be energizing instead of stressful when you actually cared about what you were doing. It meant respect from my colleagues, which felt earned rather than demanded. It meant I was building something real, something that couldn't be taken away by someone else's opinion of me. I moved out of our apartment, found a smaller place that was actually mine, decorated it with stuff I liked instead of stuff that looked good in photos. I bought a ridiculously comfortable couch that Sabrina would have hated because it wasn't aesthetic enough, and I loved every ugly, comfortable inch of it. I hung posters of things I actually enjoyed instead of the minimalist art prints that were supposed to make us look cultured. I played music too loud and left dishes in the sink occasionally, and lived like a person instead of a prop. My friends started reaching out again, the ones who drifted away during my Sabrina years, probably because they'd been waiting for me to wake up and couldn't stand to watch me sleepwalk through my own life anymore. We'd meet for actually affordable dinners and talk about real things, and nobody compared me to anyone else's husband or suggested I needed to be more impressive. They just liked me, regular me, stable, boring me, and it felt revolutionary. 3 months post-sushi, I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. Not because I looked that different physically, though the gym was definitely paying dividends, but because I looked happy, actually happy, not performing happiness for someone else's benefit. My eyes looked lighter, my smile looked real, and I stood up straighter because I wasn't carrying the weight of someone else's disappointment anymore. I grieved, hit the gym, found reasons to laugh again, and somewhere in that process, I'd found myself. The version of me that existed before Sabrina, but better, stronger, wiser. The version that knew stability wasn't boring, it was valuable. The version that understood self-respect wasn't optional, it was essential. Heartbreak had sucked for exactly 72 hours. Everything after that, that was just leveling up. At a tech seminar, of all places, I met someone who would completely restore my faith in the concept that not everyone is a soul-sucking vampire disguised as a romantic partner. The seminar was one of those professional development things my company sent me to, the kind where you sit in uncomfortable conference chairs for 8 hours learning about digital trends you already knew about, drinking mediocre coffee, and pretending to take notes while actually just doodling in the margins of your notebook. I wasn't expecting anything life-changing, Just some continuing education credits and maybe a free lunch if we were lucky. Her name was Zoe, and the first thing I noticed about her wasn't her face or her style, but her socks. Mismatched socks, deliberately mismatched. One with tiny astronauts and one with pizza slices, peeking out from under her jeans as she sat cross-legged in the chair next to mine during the afternoon session about user interface design. Most people at these things dressed like they were auditioning for a corporate catalog, but she was wearing a vintage band t-shirt, ripped jeans, and those ridiculous socks, looking completely comfortable in her own skin in a way that felt almost rebellious in a room full of business casual. She was a freelance designer, which I learned when the moderator made us do one of those excruciating icebreaker exercises where you turn to the person next to you and introduce yourself like you're in kindergarten instead of a professional seminar. "Hi, I'm Zoe," she said, extending her hand with a smile that seemed genuinely warm instead of professionally polite. "I design websites for small businesses and occasionally question all my life choices. How about you?" I laughed, actually laughed, which felt weird because I'd forgotten what it was like to find someone immediately funny without them trying too hard. "Noah," I said, shaking her hand. "I work in IT and definitely question my life choices, so we have that in common." Our first real conversation wasn't about status or careers or any of the impressive metrics that Sabrina and her friends would have used to evaluate someone's worth. It was about her cat's hatred for printers, which she explained in elaborate detail during the coffee break, complete with hand gestures and sound effects. Apparently, her cat, whose name was Chairman Meow because of course it was, had declared war on her home office printer and had been winning that war for approximately 6 months. "Every time I try to print something," she explained, her eyes lighting up with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for discussing much more important topics, "he just sits on top of it and glares at me like I've personally betrayed him. And if I try to move him, he does this thing where he goes completely limp, like a furry sack of potatoes, and makes these judgmental meowing sounds that I swear translate to 'how dare you.'" I was dying laughing, actually holding my sides laughing in the middle of a tech seminar coffee break, surrounded by people networking and exchanging business cards while I was hearing about a cat's vendetta against office equipment. "Why does he hate it so much?" I asked, genuinely invested in this story in a way I hadn't been invested in anything in months. "I have no idea," Zoe said, shrugging with this helpless smile. "Maybe he's anti-technology. Maybe he thinks I should be spending more time petting him instead of printing invoices. Maybe he's just an asshole. Cats are mysterious like that." Love at first hiss, I thought, and then immediately felt weird about thinking something so corny, but also kind of perfect because it was true. Not love with Zoe, not yet anyway, but love with the idea that conversations could be this easy, this genuine, this fun without any underlying competition or performance anxiety. We exchanged numbers, ostensibly to share contact information for professional networking purposes, but really because we just clicked in that rare way that makes you want to keep talking to someone even after the obligatory icebreaker time is over. We started small, which was refreshing after the intensity of my relationship with Sabrina, where everything had felt like a high-stakes performance from day one. Zoe and I went on hiking dates, actual hikes where we wore sneakers and got sweaty and talked about random things while climbing trails that had views, but not the kind of views you'd post on Instagram. We went to coffee shops, not trendy brunch spots with 2-hour waits and complicated menus, but regular coffee shops where they knew your order and the muffins were maybe a day old, but still good. We watched bad movies together, the kind of terrible action films or ridiculous comedies that Sabrina would have refused to watch because they weren't critically acclaimed or culturally significant. Zoe loved bad movies, would provide running commentary throughout, making jokes about the plot holes and cheering for the explosions like she was watching the Super Bowl. "This is cinema," she'd say completely seriously during a scene where the main character was outrunning an explosion in slow motion, and I'd crack up because she was obviously kidding but also kind of not. There were no filters with Zoe, no carefully curated version of herself that she presented to the world while being someone completely different in private. She was just herself, consistently, whether we were at a nice restaurant or eating pizza on her couch, while Chairman Meow judged us from his perch on the printer. She had opinions about things, strong opinions, but she also listened to my opinions and sometimes changed her mind or agreed to disagree without making it a referendum on my entire personality. No fake smiles. No performing for an invisible audience. No, what do you bring to the table? Nonsense, like I was a business proposal instead of a person. When Zoe looked at me, I got the feeling she was actually seeing me, not evaluating me against some checklist of impressive qualities or comparing me to other people's boyfriends. She liked that I was stable, called it grounded, but meant it as an actual compliment, not a polite way of saying boring. You know what I love about you? She said one night while we were walking back to her apartment after dinner at this tiny Thai place that had the best pad Thai I'd ever tasted and absolutely zero ambience. You're just genuinely chill. Like, you're not trying to prove anything or be someone you're not. You're just Noah, and Noah is pretty great. I stopped walking, just stood there on the sidewalk processing what she'd said, because it was such a simple compliment, but it hit me hard. Genuinely chill. Not boring, not unambitious, not embarrassing. Just chill, just myself, and that was enough. More than enough, it was actually desirable. You're pretty great too, I managed to say, which was inadequate, but true. She smiled, took my hand, and we kept walking, and it felt easy in a way that relationships are supposed to feel, but that I'd forgotten was possible. No anxiety about whether I was being impressive enough, no mental calculations about whether I was meeting some invisible standard, no performance reviews disguised as helpful feedback. Just two people who enjoyed each other's company, holding hands, walking down the street, being genuinely chill together. We started spending more time together, falling into this comfortable rhythm where we'd text each other random thoughts throughout the day, not curated content, but actual thoughts. She'd send me pictures of Chairman Meow doing something ridiculous. I'd send her screenshots of weird IT tickets I received. We'd make plans without overthinking them. Just want to grab dinner. Or there's a terrible monster movie playing. Want to watch it? Simple, straightforward, honest. I called her real, which became my highest compliment after years of dealing with someone who was more interested in appearance than authenticity. She was real when she was happy, real when she was frustrated, real when she was tired or silly or passionate about something. No persona, no brand, just a person living her life and inviting me to be part of it without requiring me to change who I was to fit. Together, we called my ex a cautionary tale, which we did literally one night after I'd finally told Zoe the whole story about Sabrina and the sushi incident and the years of feeling not good enough. I'd been nervous about sharing it, worried that it would make me seem pathetic or damaged or like I had baggage, but Zoe just listened, asked questions, and then said, "Wow, she sounds like a cautionary tale about what happens when someone values image over substance." A cautionary tale. I repeated, testing out the phrase, and it felt exactly right. Not a tragedy, not a failure, not even really a mistake, just a cautionary tale, a story with a lesson that I'd learned and could now move forward from. Yeah, that's exactly what she is. Well, Zoe said, raising her beer bottle in a mock toast. Here's to cautionary tales and the wisdom they provide. And to finding people who like you for who you actually are instead of who they want you to be. We clinked bottles, drank, and Chairman Meow chose that exact moment to knock something off the counter in the other room, which made us both laugh. This was my life now, I realized, sitting on a couch with a woman who wore mismatched socks and had a chaos agent of a cat, drinking beer and laughing about my past instead of being controlled by it. This was what happiness looked like when it wasn't performed or curated or filtered through someone else's expectations. I wasn't trying to be impressive, wasn't worried about being ambitious enough or confident enough or whatever enough. I was just being myself, regular Noah with his stable job and his gym routine and his appreciation for bad movies and good Thai food. And somehow, miraculously, that was exactly what Zoe wanted. Not a project to improve, not a prop for her social media, not a financial safety net or a status symbol, just me. Dating Zoe felt like finally exhaling after holding my breath for 3 years, like coming home after being lost in a foreign country where I didn't speak the language. Everything was easier, lighter, more fun. We were building something together, not just her building something while I funded it, but actually together, two people contributing equally to something that belonged to both of us. And the best part? She'd never once asked me to be more impressive. Never suggested I needed to dress sharper or network better or be more like someone else. She just liked me, mismatched socks, Chairman Meow, printer wars, and all. It was revolutionary and also the most normal thing in the world, and I was finally smart enough to appreciate the difference. Karma's funny, and when I say funny, I mean absolutely hilarious in that dark, poetic justice kind of way that makes you believe the universe actually keeps receipts and occasionally calls them in with interest. It doesn't knock politely on your door and announce itself like some kind of cosmic census taker. No, karma is way more dramatic than that. It rents a Tesla, crashes it through your ex's carefully constructed illusion of success, and then posts the dashcam footage for everyone to see. Metaphorically speaking, of course, though in Sabrina's case, there was actually a Tesla involved, which made the whole thing even more perfect. I found out through my old college buddy Calvin, the same guy who tried to warn me about Sabrina years ago, but I'd been too love-drunk to listen. We'd reconnected after my divorce, started meeting up for basketball on weekends, and he'd become this unexpected source of information about what was happening in Sabrina's world. Not because he was stalking her or anything creepy, but because his girlfriend was friends with someone who knew someone who'd been at one of Sabrina's networking events. And you know how information travels through social circles like wildfire through dry grass. Dude, Calvin said one Saturday after we'd finished playing, both of us sweaty and drinking Gatorade like we were still 22 instead of pushing 30. You're not going to believe what I heard about Sabrina. He had this look on his face, the kind of expression people get when they have really good gossip and they're trying to decide if sharing it makes them a bad person or just a realistic person who understands that sometimes schadenfreude is valid. What? I asked, genuinely curious, but also trying to play it cool like I didn't care, which was partially true. I'd moved on, was happy with Zoe, had my life together in ways that Sabrina had never appreciated. But also, yeah, I wanted to know what was happening with the woman who'd told me her friends were embarrassed by me. Sue me for being human. Calvin took a long drink, building suspense like he was about to reveal the ending of a thriller movie. Remember that guy she started dating right after you split? Tyler something. The one she was posting all over social media with those captions about finding someone who matched her ambition. I nodded, remembering the posts I'd seen before I'd blocked her on everything. Tyler had looked exactly like someone Sabrina would date. Perfectly styled hair, expensive watches in every photo, always posing in front of luxury cars or high-end restaurants. The kind of guy whose entire personality was his perceived net worth. The venture capitalist, I said, using air quotes because even then I'd been skeptical about his credentials. Yeah, about that, Calvin said, grinning now like he was about to deliver the punchline to the world's best joke. Apparently, Tyler wasn't actually a venture capitalist. He was just a guy with ventures and absolutely zero capital. Like, negative capital. Debt capital. I felt my eyebrows shoot up. Wait, what? Okay, so get this, Calvin continued, settling in to tell the story properly. Tyler had this whole persona, right? Talked a big game about his investment portfolio, his startup connections, his deal flow, all this finance bro nonsense. Sabrina ate it up, obviously, because he seemed exactly like the kind of impressive guy she'd always wanted. He drove a Tesla, wore designer suits, took her to all these fancy places, the whole package. Let me guess, I said, already seeing where this was going. None of it was real. Oh, it was real, Calvin corrected. It just wasn't his. The Tesla was leased, and he was 3 months behind on payments. The suits were rented from some service that lets you pretend to be rich for a monthly subscription. And those fancy dinners? He was putting them all on credit cards that were already maxed out. Dude was living a complete fantasy life funded entirely by debt and apparently other people's money. I started laughing, couldn't help it, just stood there in the parking lot of the basketball court laughing like a maniac while Calvin grinned and nodded. It gets better, he said. So Tyler starts asking Sabrina for money. Small amounts at first, couple hundred here and there for bridge funding, until his big deal closed. She lent it to him because she believed in him, believed in his vision, all that crap she used to say about ambition and building something together. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Sabrina, who'd used me as her personal bank account while she built her brand, was now being used the exact same way by someone who was just better at the con than she was. How much? I asked. Thousands, Calvin said, shaking his head. He borrowed money from her, convinced her to put his expenses on her credit cards because his were temporarily frozen due to a banking error, maxed out 3 of her cards buying God knows what, probably more stuff to maintain his fake lifestyle. Then he told her about this massive deal, This huge investment opportunity that was going to pay everything back plus interest, make them both rich, set them up for life. Let me guess, I said. The big deal fell through. The big deal never existed, Calvin corrected. It was completely made up. And when Sabrina started asking questions, getting worried about the money, wanting to see contracts or meet his business partners, Tyler ghosted her. Just disappeared. Blocked her on everything. Changed his number. Probably moved to a new city to run the same scam on some other woman who values appearance over reality. I felt a weird mixture of emotions hit me all at once. Part of me felt vindicated, like the universe had just proven my point about Sabrina's terrible judgment and obsession with surface-level impressiveness. Part of me felt bad for her, because getting scammed sucks regardless of whether you kind of had it coming. And part of me, the petty part that I'm not super proud of but also not going to apologize for, felt absolutely delighted by the poetic justice of it all. That's not even all of it, Calvin continued, clearly saving the best for last. The financial disaster was just the beginning. Word got around about what happened, probably because Sabrina had been posting about Tyler constantly, and then he just vanished, and people started asking questions. Her work found out she'd been using company resources to help Tyler with his fake business stuff, emailing potential investors from her work account, that kind of thing. They fired her. They fired her? I repeated, trying to process this avalanche of karma. Immediate termination, Calvin confirmed. Something about misuse of company resources and violating their code of conduct. And here's where it gets really good. Her friends, Sarah and Jess and all those people from the brunches, the ones who were supposedly embarrassed by you, they dropped her immediately. Suddenly found new brunch buddies, stopped inviting her to things, unfollowed her on social media, the whole Mean Girls routine. I thought about those women, the ones who'd looked at me like I was an embarrassment, who'd laughed their performative laughs and sipped their expensive cocktails and judged me for being stable and boring. Now they were doing the same thing to Sabrina, except she'd actually believed they were her friends, had probably thought their friendship was real because it looked good in photos and felt important at networking events. So she lost her job, her boyfriend, her money, and her friends. I summarized, trying to wrap my head around the complete collapse of the life she'd been so desperate to build. All in what, like 6 months? About that, Calvin said. Basically, everything she thought was impressive and important turned out to be either fake or conditional. The boyfriend was a con artist. The friends were only there for the good times. The job was contingent on her not being an idiot, and the whole lifestyle was built on credit cards and delusion. I stood there, processing this information, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, thinking about how life has this way of teaching you exactly the lessons you need to learn whether you want to learn them or not. Sabrina had wanted impressive so badly she'd fallen for the most obvious scam in the book, had traded someone real for someone fake and paid for it in every possible way. I know I should feel bad for her, I said finally, because that's what good people are supposed to say in these situations, what evolved, mature, emotionally healthy people are supposed to feel. But you don't, Calvin finished for me, grinning. Okay, maybe I smiled a little, I admitted. But just a classy smile, you know? Like a man who knows the sushi bill was the best investment he ever made. Like someone who dodged a bullet and is grateful the bullet revealed itself before doing more damage. Calvin laughed and clapped me on the shoulder. Dude, you're allowed to feel good about this. She treated you like crap, told you her friends were embarrassed by you, used your money while insulting your character. Karma didn't do anything to her that she didn't set up herself. She chose appearance over substance, chose impressive over real, and she got exactly what those choices lead to. Nothing real, nothing lasting, nothing genuine. He was right, of course. I hadn't caused any of this, hadn't wished it on her or schemed for her downfall. I just walked away, paid for my half of the sushi, and built a better life. Sabrina had done this to herself by chasing the wrong things, by valuing the wrong qualities, by treating people like accessories instead of human beings. The universe hadn't punished her. It had just given her exactly what she'd asked for. An impressive boyfriend who turned out to be as fake as her curated Instagram life. Friends who were as shallow as her values. And a career that evaporated the moment she prioritized her image over her integrity. I didn't celebrate exactly, because I'm not a monster and watching someone's life implode isn't something to throw a party about. But I did smile, a small, knowing smile. The kind of smile you get when you finally understand that the trash took itself out and saved you the trouble. The kind of smile that says I told you so without having to say it out loud. The kind of smile that comes from knowing you made the right choice even when it was hard. Even when you felt like maybe you were giving up on something that could have been saved. Sabrina had lost everything she thought mattered. The impressive boyfriend, the prestigious job, the glamorous friend group, the aspirational lifestyle. But really, she'd lost those things the moment she prioritized them over everything real, over actual connection and genuine partnership and honest relationships. Tyler had just been the messenger, Karma's way of delivering the bill for years of treating people like props in her personal brand. And me? I was exactly where I was supposed to be, with someone who valued me for who I actually was, doing work I was proud of, living a life that was real instead of performed. The sushi bill had bought me freedom, and watching Sabrina's impressive life crumble just confirmed I'd made the right purchase. Karma really does keep receipts, and apparently it accepts payment in Tesla leases and maxed-out credit cards. Months later, when I was firmly settled into my new life with Zoe, sleeping peacefully for the first time in years, my phone buzzed at exactly 2 in the morning with a text that made me laugh out loud in the darkness of my bedroom. Hey, been thinking about us. Classic. The late night, I miss stability message that every person who's ever been dumped for not being exciting enough eventually receives when their ex's exciting life turns to absolute garbage. It's like there's a playbook somewhere, probably sold on Amazon for $9.99, titled, How to Crawl Back When Your Choices Catch Up With You. And Sabrina had clearly purchased the audiobook version. I stared at my phone screen, watching those 3 dots appear and disappear as she typed and deleted, probably workshopping the perfect message that would make me forget she'd called me unimpressive and embarrassing. The lack of self-awareness was genuinely stunning, like Olympic-level stunning, the kind that deserves a gold medal in audacity. Then another text came through. Tyler wasn't what I thought. Can we talk? Oh, so Tyler, the fake venture capitalist with the leased Tesla and rented suits, wasn't what she thought? Shocking. Absolutely shocking that the guy who looked too good to be true turned out to be exactly that. I wanted to respond with, yeah, turns out impressive people are sometimes just impressively good at lying. But I had grown as a person, and also it was 2 in the morning, and I had work in 6 hours. I typed out LOL and then stared at it for a solid minute before deleting it, because as satisfying as it would have been, it also would have been engaging with her, and engagement was exactly what she wanted. She wanted a response, any response, wanted to know she still had some kind of effect on me, that I was still thinking about her enough to reply even if it was just to mock her. So I did something better. I did nothing. Just put my phone face down on the nightstand, rolled over, and went back to sleep next to Zoe, who was blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding in my text messages because she was a normal person with a normal sleep schedule who didn't send desperate messages in the middle of the night. The next day, Sabrina tried calling. I watched her name flash across my screen during my lunch break, felt absolutely nothing, and let it go to voicemail. She didn't leave a message, which told me everything I needed to know about how serious her desire to talk actually was. If it was really important, really genuine, you leave a voicemail. You don't just call and hope the person picks up so you can wing your apology. Then her friends started the guilt-tripping campaign, which was almost more annoying than Sabrina's attempts. Sarah, one of the brunch crew who'd looked at me like I was a lost puppy at fancy people events, sent me a message. Noah, Sabrina really needs closure. You owe her that much. I read that message 3 times, each time getting more annoyed by the sheer entitlement of it. I owed her closure. I owed the woman who'd told me her friends were embarrassed by me, who'd used my money while criticizing my character, who'd dumped me for someone shinier and faker. I owed her exactly nothing, and I was pretty sure I'd already paid any debts I might have had when I covered my half of that sushi dinner. You owe her closure. No, I owed her half a sushi roll, and I already paid that. I typed back, then deleted it because engaging with her friends was even worse than engaging with her. These were the same people who dropped Sabrina the second her life stopped looking Instagram perfect, the same fake friends who judged me for being real. Their opinion on what I owed anyone was worth less than expired coupons. I blocked Sarah. Then I blocked the number Sabrina had been texting from. Then I blocked her on every social media platform I could think of, even the ones I barely used, because I was being thorough. If she wanted closure, she could write it in her diary or talk to her therapist, or maybe just accept that some chapters end without a dramatic final scene where everyone gets to say their piece. The closure she was looking for was probably an apology from me, some kind of acknowledgement that I'd been too harsh walking out of that restaurant, that I should have been more understanding of her journey, or whatever therapy speak she'd convinced herself made her the victim in this story. But I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction, wasn't going to rewrite history to make her feel better about her choices. The real closure was this. I'd moved on, built a better life, found someone who actually valued me, and learned that stability wasn't boring. It was the foundation everything real gets built on. Sabrina could figure out her own closure, preferably far away from my phone and my peace of mind. It happened on a Sunday morning at my favorite coffee shop, the kind of place with actually good coffee and zero pretension. Zoe and I were laughing over croissants, her telling some story about Chairman Meow's latest printer attack, when a shaky voice cut through our bubble of happiness. "Noah, can we please talk?" Sabrina stood there looking significantly less polished than the last time I'd seen her, designer bag replaced with something normal, confidence replaced with desperation. She launched into her rehearsed speech about how I was real, how she missed my boring stability, how Tyler had used her and she'd made mistakes. I nodded politely. "That's tough. Maybe next time, try not dating PowerPoint presentations." Her face went red. "You're being cruel." I smiled calmly. "No, just efficient." Zoe handed me my latte and whispered, "Who's this?" "A case study in bad decisions," I replied. Sabrina's eyes widened. Then she turned and stormed out. The cafe didn't actually applaud, but in my head they gave me a standing ovation, and honestly, that counted enough for me. Fast forward to today, and life is honestly better than I ever imagined it could be during those sad sushi dinner days. Promotion secured and crushing it at work. Side business booming because I finally had the mental energy to build something for myself. Gym gains absolutely glorious, the kind where you actually need new shirts because your old ones don't fit right anymore. Zoe and I are thriving, living that peaceful, grounded, unstoppable life that Sabrina thought was boring, but turns out is actually just called being genuinely happy. Last week, I ran into Sabrina's ex-friends at a charity event. Sarah approached with that fake smile, saying, "Wow, Noah, you're doing amazing." I smiled back, completely unbothered. "Yeah, stability's really trending this year." And there she was across the room, Sabrina herself, standing in the corner pretending not to see me while I laughed with colleagues who actually respected me. For a split second, I almost felt bad. Then I remembered the sushi bill, and that feeling evaporated instantly. Now her friends watch me thrive online, while she spirals quietly offline, probably still trying to find her next impressive disaster. Because revenge isn't a slap, a post, or a dramatic speech. It's living so well your ex's Wi-Fi cries when they see your updates.